On November 11th, 2006, at the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas, Nevada, Matt Serra defeated Chris Lytle by split decision to become the winner of the 4th season of The Ultimate Fighter, a season that was pitched as a comeback for former UFC fighters. It was a contentious decision, a rare example of a high-level mixed martial arts bout being decided by dueling 30-27 scorecards. The win brought Serra's record at welterweight to 1-1, to go with his 3-3 mark at lightweight. Despite Serra's 500 record in the octagon, he was tabbed as the next challenger to recently crowned UFC welterweight champion Georges St-Pierre, who was still several years away from inserting himself into the greatest of all time discussion, but was already acknowledged as one of the top pound-for-pound fighters in the sport and its first superstar of the post-Tough era. How bare must the UFC's shelves have been that it would need to award a title shot to a former lightweight with just one win in his new division? Not very bare at all, it turns out. On that November night, 16 years ago, the UFC had other options. The most obvious was Diego Sanchez. The winner of the first season of The Ultimate Fighter was a perfect 16-0, 5-0 in the UFC. John Fitch, who had been passed over for the reality show and signed directly to the UFC essentially because he was already too good to have to win his way into the UFC through a reality show, was on a 12-fight win streak, the last 4 of them in the UFC. Josh Koscheck, another product of Tough One and a teammate of Fitch at American Kickboxing Academy, had bounced back from his shocking submission loss to Drew Fickett a year before and had won 3 in a row, including a lopsided beating of former middleweight champ Dave Menne. Nonetheless, 5 months later, on April 7th, 2007, Serra faced St-Pierre at UFC 69 and shocked the world, knocking out the 12-1 favorite in the first round and cementing his own place in MMA history. At that very same event, Sanchez and Koscheck squared off. Koscheck won by unanimous decision, and Sanchez would go on, never to fight for a UFC welterweight title. Welcome to the Sherdog Radio Network preview for UFC 281, Adesanya vs. Pereira. I'm your host, Ben Duffy of Sherdog.com. With me, as always, is Keith Shillan, the executive producer of the Sherdog Radio Network. And Keith, why did you tell all these folks, 1, how you're doing, and 2, why on earth I'm talking about some bout from the Stone Age of MMA on this preview?
Yeah, so I'm doing great, man. How you doing?
I'm doing really well.
Yeah, I'll say this. I have no idea. I'm thinking, I'm looking at my notes and I'm like, where the hell is this going? I'm like, are we doing a UFC 69 breakdown? Like I'm going to go perfect in my picks. Actually, no, I might still take St. Pierre.
Yeah. Same here.
Are you going with Adesanya's on his way to be an all-time great? I don't know where you're going with this.
For those of you who are listening to this on Spotify or iTunes and can't see Keith's face, he is, of course, goofing off. He knows exactly where we're going with this because it's impossible to talk about this card. And this is a deep card. We're going to go in depth from the first prelim all the way up to the main event. But it's hard to look at this card without looking at it through the lens of, wow, Israel Adesanya, one of the top 2 or 3 pound-for-pound fighters in the sport, is fighting a guy who's 6-1 as a pro in mixed martial arts and is a couple wins away from like his LFA career.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Now, Serra versus GSP was derided even at the time as like obviously the UFC has jumped the shark. Everything's going downhill now that this reality show is on TV. They're deciding title challengers out of these UFC cast-offs on some reality show. And then, of course, Serra goes on to knock out GSP. It's still one of the greatest upsets in UFC title fight history. Can you really judge these things based on the results? Because Fitch and Koscheck both did get their cuts, and GSP destroyed them both. Even though they were obviously much more deserving challengers on paper. We're not giving our predictions for the headliner yet here, but if Pereira starches Israel Adesanya, does that justify and vindicate this title shot? Or are there still like people in the line at middleweight that have cause like for grievance about this?
Yeah, so I guess Andre Muniz is probably the guy that probably has the strongest case for a shot. I don't think this is a Serra case because there's history to it. Obviously the wins over the current champion in kickboxing. So I feel like it's more of like when Jeremy Horn got a title shot against Chuck Liddell. Remember when Chuck Liddell was the champion and
Sure,
and he was on that like revenge tour and they brought in Jeremy Horn. Like I kind of feel like it's something like that. Or John Lober getting a title shot against Frank Shamrock because of a previous win. But I thought he might not be the one in the sense of this is the guy who most deserves, but he can't be any further down the list than 2 or 3 based on starching, one punch knocking out Sean Strickland, a top 10 guy in his last fight.
Was Pereira beating Strickland kind of the equivalent of when Chimaev beat Burns, and everyone could go, okay, he may be overhyped, he may get a little bit of a shortcut, but he's proven that he at least belongs in the discussion?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, it's interesting, you brought up a couple of examples. You talked about Liddell versus Horn, which off the top of my head, I think that was 2006. You brought up Lober versus Shamrock, which, I mean, you went back to 99. What's the most recent title fight you can think of that's kind of this much of a, like, I'm not going to say undeserved because, like, obviously you can make a case he's beaten a top 5 fighter, but that seems like this much of kind of a skipping the line that wasn't because of like injury or something freakish.
Yeah, not something freaky where like Joe Soto got thrown into the main event on his
right.
Most recent where someone just absolutely jumped the line that no one kind of saw coming. Well, I shouldn't say that. We saw this one coming, but Weili Zhang, like when she got her first title shot, it mostly was we're going to China. Let's get a Chinese fighter in the main event. Oh, let's get a title shot. Let's make it super big. That's probably the one that comes to mind. Go back a little further. Brock Lesnar, his title shot against Randy Couture was more, and obviously both those cases they won, so they showed that they were top level talent. And I don't think either one of us is saying Alex Pereira is not a top level talent. You don't starch Sean Strickland without being a top level talent.
No, absolutely. No, and it's interesting, one, that you named a couple of fairly recent examples, especially the Weili Zhang one, where, well, hell, she's fighting on this same card. And then, Lesnar, where his record was, I think, even shorter than Pereira's. He might only have been, 4-1 when he fought?
I think it was 2-1.
3. Let's see. He beat Min-Soo Kim, lost to Frank Mir, beat Heath Herring.
I think that's it. I think he beat Heath Herring, and that was it. And then he got the title shot.
Wow. So, obviously, a number of UFC heavyweights could have been throwing their hands up in the air there. Like Cain Velasquez, Shane Carwin were already in the UFC at that point. But if you judge this stuff based on the results, I guess it was deserved after all.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We're filming a little early, and every single dog in my neighborhood is all barking at the same time right now. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if you guys can hear that. My dog's barking.
Yeah.
Stupid dog across the street. It's a beagle, so it has like the most annoying bark. There's a dog walking down the street. They're all trying to chime in on the Adesanya fight. I'm sorry. What'd you ask me?
I just said, if you judge these things by the outcomes rather than by the process by which you got there, then all of a sudden everything's well-deserved. Well, obviously Sarah belonged there. Obviously Lesnar. Obviously Weili Zhang belonged there.
Even some of the ones that people didn't expect but happened because of injuries. I think it's TJ Dillashaw when he first got his title shot. Not many people were giving him a chance. He wasn't the guy that was supposed to be head and morale. I think of Michael Bisping against Luke Rockhold kind of was the right place.
John Jones. Time. John Jones, both your and my pick for the greatest fighter of all time. It came sooner than expected. Like he got his shot against Shogun, on shorter notice, like shorter in his own career than expected. Yeah. It's just interesting food for thought. The rest of this card is also interesting food for thought. obviously, you and I talk about these cards before and after. We always give them a letter grade after. We usually remember to give them a letter grade before. When you're looking at this card, which obviously there's no sense even comparing this to the average fight night card. No sense comparing this to our last couple of UFC Vegas 62, 63, 64. This is worth comparing to UFC 279 and UFC 280. Considering this is the one that they chose to stick in Madison Square Garden, if the UFC is going to have a favorite child among favorite children, this is the one that they would want to stack with the most marquee level stuff. How do you think this one looks on paper compared to the other major pay-per-view events of this year?
Yeah, well, being in MSG, being in the most famous arena in America always brings a huge card, brings a little more excitement, the bright lights, Times Square, if you as soon as you exit MSG, you turn to the right and there's the Empire State Building right next to you in the middle of the road. Just makes everything. You
say that like a guy who's been there before and maybe is going to be there again sometime.
I'm going to be there. I'm going to be there Saturday. It just makes everything seem bigger. The big skyscrapers when you walk out makes it seem like a big deal. As far as the card, I mean, this card is loaded. I mean, you have probably the most intriguing matchup for Israel Adesanya since he won the title. You have another title fight. You have a somehow kind of grudge match between Dustin Poirier and Michael Chandler, two action fighters, and then all the way down the list. I mean, you got Molly McCann. Well, we'll get to that later. But you have Molly McCann, who's a fan favorite, and you have Frankie Edgar's retirement fight, and you got other people jockeying for position, a lot of good prospects, and a couple people on the brink, people who had runs who kind of are in desperation to get a win. I'm talking about Dan Hooker. I'm talking about Dominick Reyes. I think this card is everything you'd want.
I'm with you. Obviously, just like any Israel Adesanya card, it is loaded with city kickboxing people. They just let them all get on the same plane, I guess. Maybe New Zealand is still under some extra careful COVID precautions. They're like, okay, you can go, but just send all your people at once. You mentioned a few people that could really use a win right now. Brad Riddell is certainly among them. I think he's a guy that you and I both still have a lot of hope for as a prospect, but, like a little of the shine is off after his last couple of appearances. You mentioned retirement fights. Karolina Kowalkiewicz is fighting. We can only hope. Maybe she walks away on top. Any other general thoughts about this one before we dive into these prelims?
No, the prelims are good. The main card is good, but I think, and this is not always the case for pay-per-views, but I think in this case, the main event really does deserve most of the talk. I think it's going to really generate the most buzz at the press conferences. And there's such a great backstory that I'm really excited for this main event.
I'm excited too. And you mentioned something about it kind of being the most appealing fight for Adesanya since he took the title. I agree that it is the one where there seems to be the most doubt and discussion and dissension about what's actually going to happen in the cage since he tried moving up to 205 and fighting Jan Blachowicz.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, there's a poll up on the Sherdog front page right now that's been up for about 24 hours just asking what the outcome is. It's got 7 options: Adesanya by KO sub decision, Pereira by KO sub decision, and draw. And it is split 50-50 down the middle.
There you go. That's everything you need to know. 50-50.
Yeah.
I'm gonna pick a draw.
First up at UFC 281 is a light heavyweight matchup between Carlos Ulberg and Nicolae Negumereanu. Ulberg, the 31-year-old New Zealander, is 6-1 in his professional mixed martial arts career. He is 2-1 since joining the UFC out of the 2020 season of Dana White's Contender Series. He lost via knockout to Kennedy Nzechukwu in his UFC debut last March. Since then, he has come back with back-to-back wins over Fabio Charant this February and Tafan Chukwi, whom he knocked out in just 75 seconds at UFC on ESPN Sarukian versus Gamrot in June. he will look to make it 3 straight against Negumereanu. The 28-year-old Romanian is 13-1 overall. He is 4-1 in the UFC. He also dropped his UFC debut. That was the Saparbek Safarov all the way back in 2019. Since then, he has rattled off 4 straight wins over Alexa Kamer, Ike Villanueva, Kennedy Nzechukwu, and Ior Potieria, whom he knocked out in the second round at UFC 277 back in July. This one is fairly close on the books, but Ulberg is a slight favorite going in. He is minus 125, Negumereanu plus 105 on the comeback. Keith, I've said this every time Carlos Ulberg has fought. Star power is waiting for him. I mean, he looks like a villain from a 90s kickboxing movie. Just this devilishly handsome dude. He looks a little bit like The Rock. He's got that, like the early Rock before he got enormously jacked. He's just kind of got that one arrogant eyebrow thing. He looks very Polynesian. There's just kind of handsome, smooth, exactly. This like just smooth, handsome dude who at his best knocks people out in breathtaking fashion. He is a teammate of Israel Adesanya. Stardom is waiting if he can win enough fights to keep microphones and cameras in front of his face.
Someone you just don't like. Someone like you don't bring your girlfriend around. You don't like
exactly. You don't just bring your girlfriend. I mean, I remember, I used to read Cracked in the 2000s, and Sean Baby, a big MMA fan and comedy writer, used to write a lot of articles about kickboxing and MMA, and he once said that Alistair Overeem was built in the lab to steal your girlfriend, which, in like 2006 was absolutely true. Before his face got a little, beat up. That's Carlos Ulberg for sure. Here, it's an interesting matchup because he's facing another guy that's going to want to slug it out on the feet with him, but is, less credentialed, smaller. Nonetheless, the line is close. How do you see this fight going? Does Ulberg take one more step towards assuring he's never in a curtain jerker again?
Yeah, I definitely think it should be close to the lines based on what we've seen of Ulberg. There's some fights he looks great. Then you have other fights like the Fabio Cherant fight, and that fight was so bad at the point where his own was that the one? No, that was the one that he was. Yeah,
that was down here in Houston, dude. It was terrible, and you could hear Henry Hooft in the cage just walk up to Ulberg and apologize that Cherant didn't want to fight.
Yeah, so I give him a little bit of pass on that. I think the reason why he's in the opener, it might be a little city kickboxing thing where they're kind of spacing the guys out a little bit for Eugene Berriman and the rest of the crew there, being that they have 4. Yeah, they have Ulberg, Riddell, Hooker,
and Adesanya.
Adesanya. So I think that might be a little bit of spacing going on. What we've seen of Ulberg, and he's still kind of a new talent to MMA. He's an elite athlete. He's very, very fast, like athletic, fast. On the feet, he's really relaxed. He's a good kickboxer, a really quick twitch, explosive kind of guy. Accurate strike. He's technically sound. Has this like high guard defense where he uses feints really good with his hips, with his hands, with his shoulder rolls. Really good from distance. He's kind of like a classic out fighter. He does really well with the check hook. It was kind of the thing that he caught Fabio Cherant a couple times with it, and Cherant couldn't pass it, and Cherant just said like, "Hey, if I can't get past it, I might as well not do anything. I just stay on the outside." I like when his offense, when he attacks, he cuts angles really well, so he's kind of throwing from different sides, kind of not being a stationary target. He can crack. I mean, we saw what he did to Tafon Chukwi. He's got a really good, complete kicking game. I love the oblique kicks. The ground game is still a big mystery, and I think this is actually the fight that could be tested because Negumereanu, you talked about him as a guy who's going to want to bang with him. I'd say he's a little well-rounded. He's a bit of a brawler on the feet. He throws a lot of looping shots. For a guy who's like ripped up, he's not a big cracker though. Like he did knock out Ike Villanueva, but that doesn't say too much. But he has some glaring defensive holes. He's very hittable. He backs straight up. Going way back in the Safarov fight, he was hurting that. But I actually think he's a little underrated grappler. I mean, he chain wrestles takedowns together well. He got takedowns in 3 out of his last 4 fights. Though defensively, he's not a great wrestler. And I'm going back again to the Safarov fight. He got taken down a bunch of times that fight, struggled to get back up. He has a little bit of a submission threat, though. He has 3 submissions in his career, just enough to kind of keep you honest. So as far as prediction, I kind of feel like this might be a striker versus grappling matchup. I think Negumereanu is going to test him a little bit. I think he's going to get some takedowns, but on the feet, Ulberg looks so good, especially when he lets his hands go. I think he's going to have some chances, and I think he might land something big. I'm going to say it starts off really good for City Kickboxing with Ulberg getting a second round TKO.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be interested to see what happens if Negumereanu makes a concerted effort to bring this to the ground. It's what I hope to see in the Charant fight, honestly, because coming in, I mean, I wasn't high on Charant, but I think I was probably higher on him than you were, just because, you know, I'm in Texas, where, you know, we like New England fighters better than in the Shillan home. But at the very least, the one thing he seemed to do, at least on a marginal UFC level, was take people down and be pretty heavy on top. And you're right. Like, Ulberg, he tasted Ulberg's power a couple times, wanted nothing more to do with it, and it just turned into a terrible fight and him getting cut. I can't see that happening to Negumereanu. Like, he's a guy that I'm sure he doesn't love getting hit, but he's proven that he's not afraid to. He's willing to you know, kind of bite down on the mouthpiece and engage. Ulberg's loss to Kennedy and Nzechukwu was interesting because he was winning the kickboxing. Like, he was almost as big as Kennedy. He was just a much more composed striker, but Nzechukwu stayed composed, kept coming forward, waited for Ulberg to make a mistake, and caught him and knocked him out in the fight that he was on his way to losing 2 rounds in a row. Negumereanu could do that. And again, like as you said, you know, if he decides to make a serious effort to bring this to the ground, we need to find out sooner or later what Ulberg's ground game looks like, if he's going to keep working his way up the ranks at 205. But I'm with you here. Ulberg's going to have a big reach advantage. I think he's going to have the speed and footwork to keep things at his preferred range. He's generally very good at that. You know, you mentioned his check hook that just basically stopped Charant from trying, and Charant and Negumereanu are both kind of shorter, more you know, bricked up guys. Yeah, I think this is going to be Negumereanu kind of on the gunnery range for a lot of the fights. And yeah, I think Ulberg wins by knockout as well. I'm going to say 3rd round, and it's going to be after, you know, 3 rounds of Negumereanu alternatively, you know, trying to strike with him, getting inside of Ulberg's preferred distance, or, you know, maybe trying to take it down, but just isn't able to and goes down under an accumulation of punishment. We head now to the men's bantamweight division and a matchup between Julio Arce and Montel Jackson. Arce, the 33-year-old Team Tiger Schulman representative, is 18-5 overall. He is 5-3 since joining the UFC out of the first season of Dana White's Contender Series. He has alternated wins and losses over his last 7 fights. Most recently, he won a unanimous decision over Daniel Santos at UFC 273 back in April. He will look to make it 2 in a row and snap this back and forth streak against Jackson, the 30-year-old Wisconsin native. 11-2 overall, 5-2 since joining the UFC out of the second season of the Contender Series. He's on a 2-fight win streak since his loss to Brett Johns back in 2020. He beat Jesse Strader in last March by first round TKO, beat JP Bays last September by unanimous decision. This will be his first fight in about 14 months, but he will be looking to make it 3 in a row, and he is moderately favored to do so. Jackson is minus 200, Arce plus 170 on the comeback. Keith, who do you like in this one? And you've been out ahead of me in proclaiming the rise of bantamweight and calling men's bantamweight probably the best division in the UFC right now. It takes a lot to kind of crop up onto the radar of the top 15 in this division now. There's just so many great guys there. But do you see that kind of upside for either of these two, considering that Arce is 33, Jackson is 30?
Yeah. So, yeah, Arce, I feel like he is what he is at this point. He's kind of an established veteran. He's very good, but he is what he is. Even though Jackson's already 30, he still has like a younger feel to him, and that he hasn't been in the UFC as long. He hasn't fought as many guys. So of the two of them, I would say Jackson has the better chance. But I really think both guys are good. Arce, he looked really good. I thought he looked good against Santos. I thought he looked good against Andre Ewell 3 fights ago. So he's a southpaw that he's really well rounded. He's very good defensively, good head movement. He uses feints to really set up his shots well. He's got a crisp jab. His straight left is a thing of beauty. I love the way that he targets the body and makes it a top priority. Knowing this will kind of set up his headshots later on. I'd say he has stinging power. He's not one punch put you out guy, but he can sting you. He got some great kicks. I love his high kick. I love that he goes down to fantastic calf kicks. He hurt. I go back to Hakeem Dawodu. He was hurting him with leg kicks. He doesn't look to wrestle he will look to wrestle, but he's not known to be a wrestler. But he's smart enough to know that it will help him win rounds. Though because he has a lack of a wrestling background, I do think he needs to improve his own takedown defense. That said, he is a submission threat. He's got 5 subs in his career. He could catch Jackson. Jackson almost got submitted a couple times by JP Buys. He got almost guillotined 2 or 3 times. Now, Jackson, he's a massive man away. I always mention his 75-inch reach. He's a southpaw. He's got quick hands. He throws pistons straight down the pipe. He's really good at hand fighting, and he uses those they always talk about how big his hands are. His hands are the size of Francis Ngannou. So he grabs the hands. He does it. He pulls down, kind of using his length really well. He's got really good power. He hurt. Even in a fight he lost against Brett Johns, he hurt Brett Johns. He blasted Jesse Strader. He dropped JP Buys a couple times. Because of his size, he does well in the clinch. He's willing to grind against the opponent. He has this good foot sweep that he does, which I really like. I'd say he's a pretty good offensive wrestler. I mean, he out-wrestled JP Buys, and sure, some of that is JP Buys moving up and being much smaller than him. So that I get that point. The issue is he's in losses. He's been out-wrestled. Ricky Simone out-wrestled him. Brett Johns out-wrestled him. He was even taken down by JP Buys, and one point he was mounted and had his back taken and almost subbed, which isn't good. If he ends up on top, though, he's got some really hard ground and pound. So I actually think this is a step up in competition for Jackson. And I'm really torn. I think the line should be pretty much a pick 'em. I'd say Jackson is more explosive and he has the more raw tools, but Arce is more technical. I flip-flopped on this a little bit. I say Jackson might be a little too quick. He might hit a little too hard. He might even add a couple of offensive takedowns. It was nice seeing that offensive wrestling game against JP Buys. Though, if Arce initiates his own grappling and he's the one going on the offensive wrestling, Jackson could be in trouble. I'm going to take Jackson. I'm going to take him by split decision, but not much confidence in my pick.
Yeah, I like a lot of what you pointed out there. The thing that stands out to me most about Arce's game is his kicking. Just you mentioned he kicks to all levels, and he'll kick to the legs and body early to set up him going upstairs later. I mean, anytime you can ice Julian Erosa with a head kick, anytime you're head kicking a man 6 inches taller than you, at the very least, your flexibility is impressive. You got some Jean-Claude Van Damme shit going on there.
Yeah,
but I agree that Jackson has more upside at this point. Just, the 3 years does make a difference in that division. I completely agree with you that he has more of the raw prospect feel to him. And he seems to be refining his tools and adding new tools from fight to fight. On paper, his win over Brian Kelleher is probably still his best win, but he's such a different and more complete fighter than he was a couple of years ago when he beat Kelleher. Just, has a different level of confidence, it seems like. I have Jackson here, and I think I have him a little bigger than you do. I think Jackson wins by decision, but unless Arce surprises me early, I think Jackson probably wins all 3 rounds, and it's a bit of a statement. Next up on the UFC 281 prelims is a featherweight matchup between Michael Trizano and Seung Woo Choi. Trizano, the 30-year-old Tiger Schulman export, is 9-3 overall. He is 3-3 since joining the UFC as the winner of the 27th season of The Ultimate Fighter. He is on a 2-fight losing streak, those coming against Hakeem Dawodu back in February and Lucas Almeida, who knocked him out early in the third round at UFC Fight Night Volkov versus Rosenstrike in June. He will look to get things back on track against Choi. The 30-year-old South Korean is 10-5 overall. He is 3-4 in the UFC. He is on a 2-fight losing streak as well, those being a second-round submission loss to Alex Caceres last October and a split decision loss to Josh Kulabau at UFC 275 in June. The odds here are fairly close, but Choi is a moderate favorite. He's minus 155 or so. Trizano available around plus 135 as the underdog. Keith, as we make our way up the card, a running theme is going to become guys fighting at lightweight that used to fight at featherweight and probably never should have tried. We got Renato Moicano. We got Dan Hooker. We got Dustin Poirier. I throw Mike Trizano in there. Like right now,
yeah, he's a big dude.
He's a big dude, and just by the eyeball test, always looks physically depleted on the scale and in the cage. And it's weird to say considering he won the Ultimate Fighter by beating an even bigger and more sucked out guy in Luis Pena. But as of right now, I mean, he's not the most disappointing tough winner ever, but
no.
But he's a 500 fighter who doesn't fight very often. Like he's certainly not set the world on fire. And I do wonder sometimes if we're going to look back and say, man, this guy should have just fought at 155 the whole time. I mean, he's like 6 feet tall and not skinny and just always looks grotesquely dehydrated.
And there's so many guys that they've showed that when they moved up, they become so much more successul. Even if they're the smaller guy. And Trizano wouldn't be.
No.
But even the guys who are the smaller guys have been more successful moving up.
Yeah, I mean, of the guys I just mentioned, I'll split up for everybody. Hooker's record at 155 versus 145 and Poirier's record at 155 versus 145. And by the results, it is dead obvious like which of their weight classes.
Poirier was successful at 145.
Yeah. He was a top 10 145 pounder
to an interim champion upper weight class.
Yeah, he's a top 3 150.
And he probably could compete at 172.
Yeah, I mean, he's not that tall, but dude, if you're ever in front of Dustin Poirier, he is a big dude.
Huge. He's a huge guy. He looks like a man.
He really does. With Trizano, I feel like he is at his best, he's a well-rounded fighter. Like he's a good striker. He's a surprisingly good offensive wrestler. You know, he like held his own wrestling with guys like Pena, who is an underratedly good wrestler. But I just feel as though it's all kind of hampered by like whatever kind of massive weight cut he must undergo. Like he doesn't push a pace. He fights like a guy that's guarding his gas tank. And like there's just another gear that he never quite pulls into in his losses. I mean, none of his losses have been to bad people. Grant Dawson's a very good fighter. Hakeem Dawodu's a very good fighter. Jury's still out on Lucas Almeida. But right now, he's sort of just another guy at 145. And here, I understand why Choi is the favorite, because I think he's beaten better fighters, and he's looked very impressive in his wins, where Trizano, even in his wins, they just always seem to be really like a hard fought and close, and just he has a tough time really putting his stamp on a fight. Yeah. Here, I mean, I expect that Choi is probably going to get the better of a distance kickboxing bout. If Trizano really sells out to try to bring the thing to the ground, I'll be interested to see how that goes. But Trizano also is kind of susceptible to fighting his opponent's fight. So give me Choi by a Choi fight. Like, it'll be fun. It might be the most exciting fight on the prelims, even though we're never really in danger of either guy getting finished. But yeah, give me Choi by a unanimous decision in this one.
Yeah, this is looking over the card, this is probably the fight I'm least excited about. Trizano, he is what he is. I mean, you seem a little higher on him than I am. Again, yeah, I understand about that weight cut thing. Sure, maybe he'll look better up a weight class, but he's a long and lengthy fighter, but he isn't a great athlete. He hangs his hands really low. He's a serviceable boxer at best. He does throw like an up jab based on dropping his hands. He throws straight shots down the pipe. He doesn't check leg kicks though, and his legs are huge targets because of how long he is. I mean, you go back to his fight against Lucas Almeida in his last fight. I mean, Almeida was destroying him with those calf kicks. He does use his size well in the clinch where he can kind of grind out periods of the fight. And I've said this about him before. He's not a great wrestler, but somehow he does find ways to get the fight to the ground. He's good at like creating a scramble and winning a scramble, but he's got some weak takedown defense. He has a submission threat. I'll give him that. He can catch a sub. Now, Choi, he's really inconsistent. I mean, he looks tremendous in fights against like Yusuf Salal and Julian Arosa, Suman Mkhitaryan. He looked good, but then he looked really bad against Alex Caceres. Losing to Josh Kulabau is never a good look. So I really don't know what we have with Choi. Like, he's a kickboxer. He's long and lengthy himself. He's a counter striker. He's pretty fast. He's pretty accurate. He uses feints well to draw out his attacks, set up his counters. He tends to fight in spurts, though. He'll kind of like he'll wait, and then he'll burst into the pocket and throw some hard shots. He likes to throw kicks from range. He uses his size. He also uses his size well in the clinch. He likes to do dirty box, land some elbows inside, some knees inside. Good takedown defense. I'll give him that. He's hard to take down. And when he is taken down, he does pretty well to get back to his feet. The times I've seen him on top, he's got some strong ground and pound. This is a tough fight to pick because I'm not really high on either guy. But I'll say both guys have shown some glimpses of being good, but then they both look terrible at times. I'm leaning Choi because I think he's the better athlete. I think he might have the speed advantage. Give me Choi to outpoint Trizano on the feet. But again, back-to-back fights, I don't have a lot of confidence in this one. Give me Choi by decision.
We head now to the strawweight division, and what, off the top of my head, I believe is the only matchup between two fighters that are both below 500 in the UFC. So if that's any kind of health indication, then UFC 281 is a healthy card indeed. This one is Karolina Kowalkiewicz versus Silvana Gomez Juarez. Kowalkiewicz, the 37-year-old from Poland, is 13-7 overall. She is 6-7 across a UFC run that saw her fight all the way to a title shot against her countrywoman, Joanna Jędrzejczyk. However, she is just one fight removed from a miserable 5-fight skid. She won back in June at UFC Fight Night Volkov versus Rosenstrike, choking Felice Herrig into retirement in the second round. That snapped a losing streak for her against Jessica Andrade, Michelle Waterson Gomez, Alexa Grasso, Yan Xiaonan, and Jessica Penne. She will look to make it 2 in a row against Gomez Juarez. The 37-year-old Argentinian training out of Mexico is 11-4 overall. She is 1-2 in the UFC. Lost her first 2 UFC bouts against Lupi Godinez and Vanessa Demopoulos before coming back to knock out Na Liang in the first round at UFC 275 in June. Thus far, none of her 3 UFC bouts has even reached the end of the first round. The odds are that they will here. The odds are also pretty close in terms of the straight money line, close to a pick 'em. Right now, Kowalkiewicz minus 115, Gomez Juarez minus 105. Keith, off camera, or off tape, you said this might be the fight on the card you're least excited about, along with Trizano and Choi. And so am I, but it's for the same reason. It's not that the fights are necessarily going to be dreadful, even though I don't think either of them is a guaranteed barn burner. Yeah. But because there is so little riding on them. Whoever wins between Trizano and Choi is still 5 wins away from the top 15 at featherweight.
Yeah, exactly.
Like with Kowalkiewicz and Juarez, the only real suspense for me is if Kowalkiewicz wins, will she retire and just try to retire on a high note? Yeah, because I mean she was practically retired. Yeah,
I thought she was going to retire to beat Harry.
Yeah, and when I say I hope she retires, it's not out of a mean-spirited thing, but it's just like this is your storybook ending. That might have been the only woman in the division that you matched up that well against. Just swing off into the sunset. But here she is back against, I mean, Silvana Gomez Juarez never reached the heights that Kowalkiewicz did. You know, Kowalkiewicz fought her way to a title shot, even if like she came up badly short there. Despite the fact that they're both 37, like Gomez Juarez, like physically seems to have a little more left in the tank. Kowalkiewicz at her very best was an ultra low power outfighting kickboxer. I mean, I remember the thing they were trying to sell when she headed into her title shot against Jędrzejczyk was she's the only woman in the division with more strikes per round landed than Joanna. You know, kind of the same way they tried to tell us, well, Alexander Gustafsson is even taller than John Jones, as like their desperate way to make the fight sound competitive. You know, because Kowalkiewicz came into that like landing something like, 12 significant strikes a minute or something. And it just, there was so little power. Like, Joanna was landing 10 strikes around, but had like stinging, stop your opponent in their tracks power on each individual strike, and Kowalkiewicz just didn't have that. And across, her losing streak leading up to the Herrig fight, she just couldn't even put that on people. Like, she didn't have enough power or the footwork to keep Jessica Andrade off of her. So Andrade just crashed the pocket and crushed her. Smaller women that were more athletic and stronger, like Michelle Waterson, Alexa Grasso, just bodied her. Yan Xiaonan wanted to fight the exact same fight as Karolina Kowalkiewicz and just was better at it. None of that is going to have gotten better between ages 33 and 37 for her. I do lean Silvana Gomez here in the slight upset. I think she's probably going to be able to just do a lot of the same. Like, I think even though she's much shorter and is going to give up reach, just being aggressive and understanding that Kowalkiewicz can't really hurt her is going to be enough for her to crash the pocket, get things in her preferred distance, land punches on Kowalkiewicz. And I could even see her getting the knockout here. Like, give me Silvana Gomez Juarez to make it to the second round for the first time in her UFC run, but Kowalkiewicz is going to be like busted up and not OnlyFans ready by the end of that first round, and she goes down for good in the second.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about like Kowalkiewicz's run to the title. She beat Rose Namajunas. Like, how crazy is that? Kowalkiewicz has a win over Rose Namajunas. I'll say this: she looked pretty good in her last fight. Now that might say more about Felice Herrig, who retired immediately after the fight, than it does about Kowalkiewicz at this point. Everything you said is right. I mean, she's a volume striker. She's a kickboxer. She's not a great athlete. She's flat-footed. She attacks with combos. I like that, but she lacks power, and that's because she doesn't step into her shots, doesn't sit on her punches, a lot of arm punches. She does have a pretty good kicking game, and I think she's if she makes it nasty, she's better at that. Like, she get in the plum clinch. She beat up Felice Herrig at the plum clinch pretty good. She can grind in the clinch. Good dirty boxing, good at framing and landing elbows in close range. She did hit a nice foot sweep in that fight. And she also subbed Herrig in her last fight. Now, that's only her second career submission, so I'm not thinking she's Mackenzie Dern out there. And she was submitted, I think, 2 fights ago against Jessica Penne, so that doesn't look good. Now, Silvana Gomez Juarez, she's also a kickboxer herself. She's pretty elusive, a lot of L step in, but she's not that quick. Like, she struggled with the speed of Ariana Lipski, which is not good. She's more of a power hitter. She likes to get in the pocket, unload big shots, hard hooks. She showed some power in her last fight. I like that she targets the body. I like that she throws keep kicks. That's kind of her specialty. She does a lot of stupid spinning attacks, which I don't like. And she's been hurt for someone who's known for her stand-up. She was hurt by Lipski. She was hurt by Lupi Godinez. She even though she's a kickboxer, she does know that she should wrestle a little bit. She will go for a takedown. She likes getting inside and kind of snatch singles and stuff like that. But she's a weak defensive wrestler, and she was quickly submitted in back-to-back fights. And as you mentioned, she doesn't go deep into fights, so the cardio is a question mark. Now, I want to pick Kowalkiewicz. Like, I want her to be good. I don't know if she's motivated, and I do think Silvana has the power advantage. But she's been looking so bad defensive wrestling, defensive grappling. I seen Kowalkiewicz wrestled in her last fight. I think that's the best avenue in this fight, and I think it might be safer for her to like. I'm gonna say she does it. I'm gonna say Kowalkiewicz gets some takedowns. I think she takes her back, and you know what? I'm gonna say she keeps the submission streak going. Not something she does often, but I'll say Kowalkiewicz gets a second round submission.
Hey, we have some dissension on the card in, frankly, one of the lower stakes fights, but we got to start somewhere.
Setting up the Rose Namajunas rematch.
Next up, we have a lightweight matchup between Matt Frevola and Ottman Azaitar. Now, this fight, if you recall, it's been delayed for nearly 2 years. It was originally scheduled to happen all the way back in January of 2021. It was postponed for the dumbest reason imaginable. Start laughing when you remember this, but Ottman Azaitar got removed from the fighter hotel in Abu Dhabi, sent home, and cut from the UFC because one of his cornermen or one of his entourage scaled the hotel balcony and broke into like the COVID quarantine zone to bring him a bag of like food or something.
Was this potatoes?
Yeah, it was like potatoes and something. Like, was he going to cook it in the microwave in the room? I don't know, but it was all caught on camera. The UFC sent Azaitar home immediately, cut him. They re-signed him a couple weeks later, said, okay, you get a second chance. But that is still this is Azaitar's first fight since then. So he hasn't fought since September of 2020. Frevola actually got a replacement opponent for that card. His bad luck, it was Arman Tsarukyan. Frevola's actually fought 3 times since then. He's fought Arman Tsarukyan, Terrence McKinney, and Genaro Valdez. I'm just going to plug our preview from January of 2021 in here. Like, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to it, Keith.
Screw it.
No, screw it. We got 13 other fights to talk about. The only thing I'll say is Ottman Azaitar at that time was a super hot prospect, and Matt Frevola was kind of the perfect next test for him because Frevola was coming in off of 2 straight wins over Jalen Turner, which has aged super well, and Luis Pena. All of a sudden, man, Ottman Azaitar is getting a version of Matt Frevola that is a little past his freshness date. So
I will do this. If he has, I don't know what, I think they're, well, I actually, I know exactly what hotel they're staying at. I don't want to say, but it's a really high one. I'm assuming the fighters will be pretty high, maybe like 12, 15 stories high. If I catch like Azaitar's like cornerman or teammate, something scaling the hotels in downtown Manhattan, I will pick him forever. Whatever they sneak it in, I'll pick him no matter. I don't care if he's fighting John Jones and Francis Ngannou at the same time. I will pick him to win if I catch one of his cornermen climbing up Spider-Man style up the wall.
That's absolutely. One last thing. Whatever odds are mentioned there, those are obviously an artifact of the time. The current odds for Frevola is minus 145, Azaitar plus 125 on the comeback. The UFC 257 main card powers on, and next up we have the heavy construction equipment. A lightweight matchup between Matt Frevola and Ottman Azaitar. Frevola, the 30-year-old from New York that goes by Steamroller, is 8-1-1 in his mixed martial arts career. He is 2-1-1 since joining the UFC off of the very first season of Dana White's Contender Series back in 2017. He was out for all of 2020, but fought most recently in October of 2019, winning a split decision over Luis Pena way back at UFC Fight Night, Jędrzejczyk versus Waterson. Azaitar, the man who calls himself the Bulldozer, is an undefeated prospect. The 30-year-old Moroccan German is 13-0. He is 2-0 in the UFC. He beat Kamal Worthy with first-round punches back at UFC Fight Night Waterson versus Hill last September. Despite Azaitar being one of the UFC's relatively few undefeated prospects, the line very close here. Azaitar is a minus 155 favorite, while Frevola is available around plus 135 as the underdog. Keith, not to sound like a 5-year-old, but if a steamroller fought a bulldozer, who would win?
That's This seems like totally something like a matchup Joe Silva would make just for that reason.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to put John Anik to make that comment. If he doesn't, shame on him, and Ben Duffy should take his job. This is going to be an action-packed fight. That's like one of the things I can pretty much guarantee in this fight. We'll start with the steamroller, Matt Frevola. He's very aggressive. That also makes him very hittable. He's wild. He throws like just tons of looping, hard power hooks. Kind of telegraphs everything because he wants to brawl. He invites the brawl. He does have a wrestling background. He's got some good entries. He sometimes can shoot from too far away. Gets him in trouble there. But he's good at winning scrambles. That's kind of what he's just initiating, as long as he can cause a scramble. I also like that he looks to land strikes in mid-scramble or like on a break of a scramble. He's got really good cardio. I'll give him that. You could hurt him, and he's just going to keep coming for the whole 50 minutes. It's going to be he's going to make it a non-stop action-packed fight. He also has tons of heart. Like, he's been hurt in many fights. I think about the Lando Venata hurt him, Jalen Turner hurt him, Luis Pena hurt him. He just kept coming. He has 3 submission wins and almost submitted Jalen Turner several times with a guillotine in his fight, so that's something to keep your eye on. Move over to the bulldozer, Azaitar. Fast hands, very explosive, does well to draw out feints for his counter strikes. Great timing on his counter strikes. His overhand right is deadly. Great power. He has 10 knockouts in his career. Throws so many power shots. Like, he's one of those guys, he wants to get in tight and just throw hooks, uppercuts. That's kind of what he's looking for. Kind of stays compact with that. He can be a little wild, which it would be fun if him and the steamroller are throwing bombs towards each other. But I could see Steamroller trying to wrestle him, and I haven't seen too much in the UFC from Azaitar's wrestling, but I did some of the regional stuff, and he can wrestle. Take it with a grain of salt because it's the regional scene, so I don't know how well the competition is. I love Frevola's style as far as entertainment. However, he's too hittable for my liking to kind of rise through the rankings. And Azaitar hits way too hard. I think Azaitar puts him out cold first round. Give me Azaitar by first round knockout.
Looking at Frevola's last couple of fights, and you described his style perfectly, but the last couple of fights, you know, he won decisions over 2 of the tallest, lankiest, leggiest lightweights in the UFC, and in both cases, he was the better wrestler, even though Luis Pena is a very good wrestler. Frevola turned out to be the more effective wrestler and turned out to be the less tired guy in the cage than 2 people who, by all appearances, probably cut a ton of weight. That's not what this fight is going to look like. Again, MMA math, never infallible, but I'm going all the way back to the Marco Polo Reyes fight. Marco Polo Reyes left the UFC on a 1-4 run. The one win was him just completely splitting Frevola's wig. I mean, he made Marco Polo Reyes look like, first 10 fights Mike Tyson. And Frevola, he's made incremental improvements, but he is still largely the same fighter. He is hyper aggressive on the feet, bent on landing his own offense, even at the expense of taking a few on the chin. If he cannot take one on the chin from Marco Polo Reyes, I want to say that Reyes' first punch knocked Frevola's mouthpiece halfway across the octagon. If he can't take that from him, he's not going to be able to take it from Ottman Azaitar, who just is a much better fighter, much better striker, probably a harder hitter, even just, in a vacuum. If Frevola fights to his absolute best advantage, goes for the wrestling, keeps his striking button down, I think he would probably lose a decision. I don't think he's going to fight to his best advantage. I think he is probably at least as interested in a fight of the night bonus as he is in his own win bonus. I'm tempted to say Ottman Azaitar by first round knockout because that's what I was going to say, but just to keep things spicy, let's say it gets to the second round. Frevola loses the first round, probably gets his head put on a swivel a couple of times. Second round, maybe he does come out and try to wrestle, but can't get Azaitar down and does get TKO'd in the second round. Next up, the middleweights take the cage as it is Andre Petroski versus Wellington Turman. Petroski, the 31-year-old New Jersey native, is 8-1 overall. He is a perfect 3-0 since joining the UFC as a product of the 29th season of The Ultimate Fighter. He has beaten castmate Michael Gilmore, Yao Zhonghu, and most recently, in May, Nick Maximov, whom he choked all the way to sleep with an anaconda at UFC on ESPN Blachowicz versus Rakic in May. He'll look to make it 4 in a row against Turman. The 26-year-old Brazilian is 18-5 overall. He is an even 3-3 in the UFC. He is on a 2-fight win streak. Those two coming against Sam Alvey, whom he beat last August via split decision, and then Misha Serkinov, whom he armbarred at UFC Fight Night Makhachev versus Green back in February. So two gentlemen on pretty good streaks here. Petroski, the one favored to extend it by one more. He is minus 210 or so right now. Turman around plus 175 or plus 180. Keith, am I falling into the fallacy that you get when you get a really young fighter in the UFC and you just assume they're going to keep getting better because they're young? You know,
that happens.
I mean,
sometimes.
It does. I mean, the most famous example, the one that they still laugh about in the forums, is of course Eric Silva.
Eric Silva, good point.
Because he was so young when he came to the UFC. He was an obvious athlete. So they're like, well, he's just 23. He's going to keep getting better. He's just 26. He's just 29. He's on a 3-fight losing streak, but they're going to cut him. He'll come back from World Series of Fighting and be a whole new guy. Yeah. And I mean, I think he's 55 years old now, and we're still waiting.
Melvin Gillard, the young assassin. Yeah. I think remember IFL, Chris Hordesky. He was super young, and he was supposed to be he was going to be the next. He was the face. He was going to be the guy, and then he just never got better. In fact, he got worse.
Yeah, never got better. Got worse. The other Njokuani brother ended him. He was the great Northern Hope. He was like Canada's finest. I'm still debating over whether that's Turman for me because he's just 26. He's been in the UFC since he was like 23. He moved to start training with Glover Teixeira, which should spell good things. But you still look at it, and in the UFC, he's literally beaten nobody who's still in the UFC. Marcus Perez, gone. Sam Alvey, gone. Misha Serkinov, gone. And all gone on huge losing streaks that he just ended up being part of. Conversely, none of his wins are none of his losses are bad. I mean, Carl Roberson, Andrew Sanchez, Bruno Silva, all good fighters. But except for the Roberson fight, they weren't that competitive. And Turman is starting, to me, is just kind of turning into just another guy at 185. Like, he's not especially big for the weight class. He's a good grappler, but often, decides to fight it out on the feet to his detriment, or sometimes he wants to get it to the ground and can't. I think that all spells bad news against Petroski, honestly. Petroski is, just by the eyeball test and by how he's performed against his opponents, physically, going to be a lot stronger. He's a much better offensive wrestler. Defensive wrestling, not been that heavily tested yet, but I have the feeling that if Turman tries to get him to the ground, it's going to end up being a weird scramble or just a flat-out guard pull that ends with Petroski on top, which is not what Turman wants. And on the feet, Petroski isn't an especially polished boxer at this point, but I think he has more power per strike than Turman does. So even though Turman is, I think, 5 years younger than Petroski, I feel like Petroski is more of the prospect with more upside left to him than Turman has. It's a little scary thinking of him as a 2-1 favorite here. If I were a betting man or a betting advice giver, I'd certainly stay away from this. But short of making a mistake or gassing out badly late in the fight, I think Petroski takes this one pretty handily. In fact, give me Petroski by second round TKO. Either he just catches him with a big haymaker on the feet, or they go to the ground in a position that's not what Turman wants, and Petroski just pounds him out down there.
Yeah, it's so funny. Every time Petroski fights, I want to say Ultimate Fighter win. And then I remember he didn't win the Ultimate Fighter. Just surprising because he seems like the best talent that came off that season. He's a southpaw who I think his striking has really been improving. He uses feints to set up his power shots. He keeps everything tight inside. I mean, you look at the guy. I mean, he's ripped up. He obviously has power. He has some defensive holes. He lacks head movement. I go back to his fight that he lost on the Ultimate Fighter, Brian Battle, the Yazong Hu fight. They both landed, strikes on him, a lot of strikes on him. But that's because that's his secondary skill. His main skill is his wrestling. He's a really good wrestler. Explode through your hips kind of guy. Blast double. I like that if he misses the double, he'll switch to the single, run the pipe. He does waste energy by lifting up his opponents, which I think is a little bit more for show. He's a good topside grappler. He likes to advance position on the ground, and he loves those head attacks. Head and arm choke is kind of like specialty. You saw what he caught Nick Maximoff in Anaconda choke. Being that he's a wrestler, he's uncomfortable off his back. He actually even gave up his back against Brian Battle, and in his one loss in his career was just by submission. That also was submitted on the Ultimate Fighter. Obviously, I know that's not official, but he was submitted on that too. So that's a little concerning. Now, Turman, I mean, he's only 26 years old, Ben. Like, why are you getting up with the guy? He is young. He's still in that range, but yeah, I get what you're saying. He's a high output striker. I'll say his hands are pretty quick. He's got some good snap. He wants to throw down the block, a little bit of a brawler, but he loads up. He loads up in big shots. He really kind of sells, a lot of tells of what he's doing. He also, I've seen him fights where he doesn't re-chamber back to his face, leaving it to be countered. But he's got some pretty good snap. He mixes punches and kicks well. He throws a lot of kicks. He'll throw out the occasional spinning attack. He's a good grappler. He's a BJJ black belt. I mean, I go back to that Bruno Silva fight, like when he was brutally hurt by Bruno Silva, he still had moments where he was still able to out-grapple Silva. And then he quickly submitted Misha Cirkunov, which obviously is a good sign. Now, you mentioned take it what it's worth. Misha Cirkunov looks like a shell from the guy that he once was. I'm a little worried about his chin. I mean, Andrew Sanchez clocked him in the fight. Bruno Silva also hurt him. And then even though he submitted Misha Cirkunov, he also tired down in that fight. Excuse me. I'm with you, man. I think this is the perfect stylistic matchup for Andre Petroski. I love that he's been competing in grappling competition outside of the UFC, because that's the only route I really see Turman winning, like maybe catching them in a submission. That's like his best avenue for victory. But I expect him to take Turman down. I expect him to land some hard shots to ground a pound. I think the top pressure will wear out Turman, and I actually think Petroski is going to get a finish. Like, give me, I'm going to say Petroski submits Turman. Give me, which would be surprising. But he just caught Maximoff, who's supposed to be a better grappler of the two. So I'm going to say he does it again. Give me Petroski by third round submission.
There you go. 2 calls for Andre Petroski to finish this thing before the final horn. The UFC 281 prelims soldier on with a women's flyweight matchup between Erin Blanchfield and Molly McCann. Blanchfield, the 23-year-old New Jersey native, is 9-1 in her professional mixed martial arts career. In about 3 minutes here, Keith will be telling you that she should be 10-0, but officially 9-1. She is 3-0 since joining the UFC as a standout from Invicta Fighting Championships. She has beaten Sarah Alpar, Miranda Maverick, and JJ Aldrich. The most recent of those, the Aldrich win, came back in June at UFC Fight Night, Volkov versus Rosenstrike, where she tapped her out with a guillotine choke in the second round. She will look to make it 4 in a row and perhaps mint herself a title contender sooner rather than later at the expense of McCann, the 32-year-old from Liverpool who goes by Meatball Molly, 13-4 overall. 6-3 since joining the UFC as a former Cage Warriors flyweight champ. She is on a 3-fight win streak, those coming against Ji-Yeon Kim, Luana Karolina, and Hannah Goldie. The most recent of those, the Goldie win, was a spinning back elbow in the first round at UFC Fight Night, Blades versus Aspinall. Her second spinning back elbow knockout in a row. the unlikeliest of outcomes for one of the more organic rising stars for the UFC in the last year or two. Really has become a hometown hero or a home country hero for the UFC's last couple of London cards. Nonetheless, this time she's fighting in New York. She's fighting someone from the tri-state area, and she is a whopping underdog. In fact, I think she may be the biggest underdog on the card. Blanchfield right now, minus 380, McCann plus 310. Keith, anyone who's a regular listener of either our preview or recap shows has heard you go off very reasonably and very correctly about why would you do anything with Molly McCann right now other than put her in winnable fights in England.
I don't get it.
And as if they were listening, they decided to put her in a brutal mismatch in New York against the girl from New Jersey.
Yeah, it makes absolutely no sense. So you put her, listen, I want to be very clear. I don't think Molly McCann is this world beater. I don't think this is the rise like Ronda Rousey or anything like that, which is even more reason to protect her. Put her against the fights that she's going to win. Try to drag out that star power as far as you possibly can until you have to match him against someone higher. Get her in England every single fight. And then besides getting her, making her a huge underdog, putting in the other fighter's hometown, you're hoping you're banking on, okay, you're still in New York City, you're star quality, people travel to England for you. And again, I know some of that was Patty Pimlet too. Then you're going to put her on the prelims, third prelim from the top. So she's on that ESPN route where she's not even getting her entrance, is not even getting on TV, which is a big thing. Like, if you're going to take her out, at least put her in the opener of the pay-per-view. Like, what are you doing? And listen, the UFC is by far the best MMA organization. The gap between them and number two is so massive. It's like, I don't even know who's number two, Bellator or One Championship, whatever. So usually the UFC does most things correct. This one, I think they're way off. I don't get it. Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, you want me to talk about the fight?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, so one thing I'll say about Molly McCann is, would you say the betting odds were?
McCann is plus 310, Blanchfield minus 380.
Okay, so I think the line should be closer because, McCann, say what you want to, she's been great lately. Now, again, she's taken on much lesser foes than Erin Blanchfield. But what you can see is that she gains confidence. She's someone who lives in that big moment, the crowd. Regardless of her not being in England, there's still going to be a huge pop for her, here in Madison Square Garden, a massive pay-per-view, still under the bright lights. It's still going to be a big moment. She gains confidence with that. She's got high output. She's got high pace. She fights at a really good pace. And she seems to be getting faster than she did years ago. Now, she can fight out of both stances. She does all this movement. I said this before. She does all this movement because she kind of has the Clay Guida thing going where she just kind of darts around and makes it difficult for her opponent to pick up her timing.
It's herky-jerky.
Yeah. She moves in and out of range, landing shots. Say what you want. Well, she switches stances a lot, which say what you want actually does set up her spinning attacks because it's more of they're switching stances now, and then she continues all the way through, and there's your elbow. And say what you want about the spinning, they are a real threat now. It's back-to-back fights, so it's not a fluke anymore. She's a bit of a brawler. She gets in the pocket. She's got tons of power for the weight class. I shouldn't say tons of power. She has plus power for the weight class. She tends to sit on her shots. She showed against Luana Karolina that she's starting to improve some of her defensive skills. She's moving her head a little bit more. I'm still worried about everything coming up the middle. Go back to the Talia Santos fight where Santos was kind of destroying her with teep kicks. She will also close the distance and use her strength, her physical strength. I mean, she's a burly woman for the weight class. She'll use it in the clinch, get into close quarters, land some strikes in there. She will wrestle a little bit, but like I said before, she's British, so there's a ceiling to her wrestling. She's a weak defensive wrestler. I mean, she was taken down 7 times by Laura Procopio. She was taken down 5 times by Talia Santos. if she's put on her back, she really struggled. We saw that against Santos to get up, but she's got really good cardio. That's the biggest strength of her. She can go hard for all 15 minutes. Even like before she went on this nice run and she was like kind of win one, lose one, you know, her cardio was always there. Now, I'm a big fan of Blanchfield. You already set up the first thing I'm going to say. She's 9-1. I don't care what you say. She should be 10-0. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep saying that she should be 10-0 until she actually loses a fight that she deserves to lose. She beat Tracy Cortez. So her last fight, I thought she looked a little flat. But that's how good she can be when she can be flat and she still beats a very underrated fighter in J.J. Aldridge and gets a second-round stoppage. Now, she isn't a great athlete, but her striking is improving. And like Wellington Turman, she's really young. She's only 23 years old. And she's gaining good experience, like fighting good people in the UFC. So what I like about her, so she's a little flat-footed, but she's fearless. She has good output, good pressure. She's willing to eat one to land one of her own. And she has this mean streak in her. She has a slip and rip style where she's starting to come into her power. She throws a bunch of leg kicks. She doesn't check leg kicks, which is an issue, but we saw that incredible high kick when she was still on Invicta, knocking out Victoria Leonardo. That's all her striking. Her striking's got some holes. Her ground game is really tremendous. I mean, she's an amazing grappler. Good entries, good at getting a single and running the pipe. She also is good at getting like inside trips from the body locks. I mean, we just talked about Miranda Maverick's grappling, and she turned Miranda Maverick into a takedown dummy a couple fights ago. Smothering top control, some of the best ground and pound in the game, has this mean streak on her. She's a BJJ world champion. She's a BJJ black belt. She's a submission specialist. I love the Molly McCann hype thing. Like I love this as like pretty middle of the road talent. But I think a lot of it's going to come crashing down this weekend. I expect Blanchfield to get McCann down. I think she mauls her when she gets it down. I think McCann eventually makes a mistake, and I think Blanchfield chokes her out. Give me Blanchfield by second round submission. But I'm going a streak where I'm taking all these second round submissions. I don't know what's going on.
I'm riding with you here. There are things that McCann has that can test Blanchfield. Blanchfield, for as much as her striking has developed, and I agree with you there, still gets hit solidly in most of her fights. McCann, as you mentioned, has plus power for the division. Like she's not Jessica Andrade, she's not Valentina Shevchenko, but she's certainly more powerful than 80 or 90% of the women in the division. She throws pretty high volume and is strong late into fights. Those are all things that can test Blanchfield if we get there. But I agree with you that the difference maker is going to be Blanchfield's ground game. I think Blanchfield's going to be able to get it there. You mentioned that she basically put a takedown clinic on Miranda Maverick, which is not an easy thing to do. If she can do that to Maverick, she should be able to do that to McCann. And from there, her surprisingly mean and forceful ground and pound that she uses to set up, her back takes and set up her other submissions, I think it'll be pretty quick work. Just to be different and contrarian, I'm going to say this thing gets to the third round, but second round submission for Blanchfield would not surprise me either. Next up, at UFC 281, and at least as the card is currently constituted, the second prelim from the top is a light heavyweight matchup between two gentlemen looking either for a bit of redemption or at least a little bit of forward momentum in the form of Dominick Reyes and Ryan Spann. Reyes, the 32-year-old Californian, is 12-3 overall. That's the good news. The bad news is that those three are his last three fights. He opened his career 12-0, opened his UFC career 6-0 before running into John Jones 2.5 years ago at UFC 247 down here in Houston. He dropped a unanimous decision to Jones that night that some observers felt he won, then has lost two more fights to Jan Blachowicz and Jiří Procházka, both of those by second round knockout. He is in action for the first time since May of 2021. That was the Procházka loss, and looking not to make it four in a row and complete one of the more precipitous falls from grace in the history of recent UFC title contenders. Standing in his way will be Spann. The 31-year-old Fortis MMA product is 20-7 overall. He is 6-2 since joining the UFC out of the second season of Dana White's Contender Series. He won his first 4 fights in the UFC before running into Johnny Walker, getting knocked out in the first round. Since then, he has alternated wins and losses, beating Misha Serkinov, losing to Anthony Smith, and most recently, back in May, defeating Ivan Kudalaba, whom he choked out in the first round at UFC on ESPN, Blachowicz versus Rakic. All 4 of his last alternating wins and losses have been first-round finishes. The odds favor Reyes, despite the long layoff, despite the run of misery stretching back over 2 years at this point. Reyes is minus 215, Spann plus 185 as the underdog. If you are catching only the audio version of this, Keith made the I just heard the odds for the first time and I'm looking at you funny type of. And obviously, I don't think Keith is going to bust out the, Dominick Reyes shouldn't be a 2-1 favorite over anyone in the UFC line here, because we're not dealing with marginal talents. We're talking about, fringe title contenders. But I'm going to hand it to you first, but my guess is going to be that you fall on the side that Reyes' recent run of competition comes against 3 of the last 4 champs of the UFC. He arguably won one of them, and at 31 or 32 now, he might still have more upside than people are letting on, but at the same time, Spann's game seems to be coming together a little bit as well. Tell me how you see these guys. How much upside does Spann still have left in your mind, and where does Dominick Reyes fall in this kind of suddenly wide open 205? Yeah,
with all due respect to Matt Hamill, Dominick Reyes is the only person, in my opinion, that should have a win over John Jones. I thought he beat John Jones. I don't think it was a robbery or anything like that. Just I submitted my scorecard. I thought Reyes won.
Yeah.
I was really surprised because I guys losing, on a losing streak. Ryan Spann has been competitive. This guy's headline UFCs. Like he's a good talent himself. I'll say this. So Reyes, he's a southpaw. He's an incredible athlete. He's elusive. He's got great movement. He is explosive, very similar to like Amanda Lemos we just saw. Like he springs at his opponents. He springs off his back foot. He's an in and out striker who just slides into that pocket, unloads big shots. He's got good variety in his attacks, though his left hand is that's his deadly strike. He's one of the few fighters that can counter pressure well. He can land while he's backing up. I mean, we saw it against Chris Weidman. That's a good example. His step back left hand, kind of similar like what Conor McGregor did to like Jose Aldo. That's something that Reyes is really good. He flattened Weidman with it. He dropped OSP with it. He's got good power in both of his hands, both of his legs. He can be countered a little bit because he tends to overthrow his shots at times. And he's surprisingly hittable when he becomes a stationary target, when he stands right in front and wants to have like a traditional Muay Thai bout. We saw it against Jan Blachowicz. We saw it against Yuri Prohaska. They kind of teed off a little bit to him. Because he likes to strike on his opponent's attack, he also can kind of back straight up to the cage, which is an issue. But when he initiates the clinch, he's not bad. I mean, he battled John Jones in the clinch, and he held his own. He's not much of a wrestler. He only has 2 career takedowns in the UFC. But he's shown strong enough takedown defense against guys who really want to make wrestling a game plan, like Chris Weidman, John Jones. He made them struggle. He's really good at just kind of like spreading his legs out, using that like wide base, and then just dropping down those Travis Brown type downward elbows. Though guys that he did get taken down once by Chris Weidman. It is what it is. But guys you don't expect taking him down, he got taken down by Oosthuizen and Jeremy Kimball. So what's the word I'm looking for? I'm not sure. Like I don't have a final verdict yet on his wrestling. But to his credit, he did pop right back up in those fights. He did gas a little bit against OSP, but that was such a long time ago, and he showed against John Jones that cardio isn't the issue. My biggest concern with him is he's a guy he's all about athleticism and speed. That can fade overnight, and that what concerns me most about Reyes. Like he has this feel of a guy like when it's over fast. Now Ryan Spann, he's a huge guy. He's a big light heavyweight. He's long and lengthy. he's a bit of a low output striker, and that's because he throws a lot of power shots. He whips his left hand. His big shots are kind of looping. He's got underrated ground game though. I shouldn't say I don't want to even say underrated at this point. I mean, that's what he is. He's a ground he's good on the ground. He's got 11 career submissions. He loves that guillotine. I mean, he caught Ian Cutelaba in it. He almost subbed Sam Alvey with like a standing triangle choke. Though he has all those submissions, he was submitted quickly by Anthony Smith. Though I'm not saying the loss to Anthony Smith is a fluke. I think just the way it went down was a little flukish. So as far as prediction goes, Reyes needs to avoid the takedowns in the submission game of Spann. But other than that, I think this is, even though I kind of scoffed at the line, I do think this is a good stylistic match of Reyes. Spann has power, but Reyes is the more technically sound fighter, and he's the faster one, and he's the better athlete, and he has more tools, like on the feet, the kicks, the knees, the elbows. So if Reyes is anything like the guy that fought John Jones, I think he should win. That's the big mystery. Like, I think we're going to find out. If he doesn't beat Reyes, it's done. It's all done for him. But I say he catches him. I say Reyes knocks him out in the second round.
Yeah, I get everything that you're putting out there. And I like that you pointed out that Reyes is an actual elite athlete, because there's no shortage of fighters in MMA, fighters in the UFC right now that came from college or even, professional, football backgrounds. Well, I guess we don't have any former pros in the UFC right now, and the UFC announcers will kind of use that as just an instant tag for this guy is an elite athlete. But when you look at how Ovince St. Preux actually moves in the cage, he doesn't move like a guy that's going to do great on the 20-yard shuttle drill or the 40-yard dash, whereas Dominick Reyes absolutely would. Like, there's no question of whether this dude can dunk a basketball. This dude could probably jump and dunk 2 basketballs like they do in the slam dunk competition. Just dunk one in each hand while he's up in the air. Very fast, very powerful. The question, as you kind of put out there, is after almost a year and a half off, is that going to be the same? Is it going to be the same between age 30 and age 32 that he is now? Just with injuries. Like, if a little bit of that top gear has slipped, is that enough for, Spann to take advantage of? Because I agree with you. And if this fight were taking place in August or September of 2021, I feel very comfortable taking Reyes, even coming off that 3-fight losing streak against, 3 of the top guys in the division. But in picking Spann here, I guess I'm picking Reyes to have faded a bit. Like, maybe his hour came and passed, and he's going to be one of those might have been stories where his high watermark is the night he took it to the best fighter on the planet. The scorecards didn't go his way, but kind of like we talk about Ian McCall, the night he should have beaten or should have, You
ever watch that movie, A Fighter? It's about who's the guy that Arturo Gatti had those legendary fights with? Ward. Yeah, Mickey Ward. It's about Mickey Ward, and I guess I'm not a boxing fan, but Mickey Ward's brother was also a boxer, and he had this legendary fight against Sugar Ray Leonard. And that was his high mark. That could be Reyes.
That might be it. And that's kind of what I'm picking here. And I don't pick Spann comfortably because his UFC losses have been due to his opponent's elite quick strike offense. Like, Johnny Walker blitzed him, found his chin, and knocked him out. Anthony Smith, just was blindingly faster and more fluid than him once they hit the ground. Those are things that Dominick Reyes can do, but I'm not picking it here. I think this is Spann's time. He's still inconsistent. He is still might be the guy that makes. Well, I guess Walker didn't really find his chin so much as find the side of his head or the back of his head.
Safe say he was still yelling about it somewhere.
It's still echoing. But guess what? That's something that Dominick Reyes does pretty well. It'd be horrible for that kind of lightning to strike again. But no, give me Spann here, and I'm gonna say he gets a finish. Not because I think he's that much better than Reyes, or I think Reyes is that much of a diminished quantity, but just these are both guys that it doesn't go to decision all that often. They both have just too much offensive weaponry and a few too many vulnerabilities. So give me Ryan Spann by second round TKO.
Yeah, can I just say something real quick?
Of course.
Just in case you've seen the fighter movie, I'm talking about the guy who is his name. I looked it up. His name is I should know it. He's from Lowell, Massachusetts. Dickie Uckland. I guess he fought Sugar Ray Leonard, and it was a good fighter. Maybe dropped him or something happened, but he ended up losing a decision. There's another part to that where he becomes like a crackhead and everything. I'm not saying Dominick Reyes is the crackhead. I'm not saying that part. I'm saying about the part of the guy who always is known as, oh, he gave so-and-so a good fight.
Like, once that Toyo tires money dries up, yeah, Dominick Reyes is going to be like at the bus stop. Like,
yeah, I'm not saying he's going to be breaking into like convenience stores overnight or anything like that.
Oh, man. He'd make a terrifying burglar. This is 6'4" huge. Oh, man.
Yeah, that's if I have to respond to a call and Dominick Reyes is the burglar, I instantly retire. I retire right now.
After going, how the fuck did Dominick Reyes get to Rhode Island? I thought he was from Southern California. The featured prelim at UFC 281 is a lightweight matchup between Brad Riddell and Renato Moicano Carneiro. Riddell, the 31-year-old New Zealander, is 10-3 overall. He is 4-2 in the UFC. He won his first four right out of the gate, minting himself a top 10 contender before running into Rafael Fiziev, more specifically the heel of Rafael Fiziev's foot, as he got knocked out by a spinning wheel kick in the third round, then got choked out by Jalen Turner in just 45 seconds in his next appearance. That was at UFC 276 this July. So Riddell finds himself riding a two-fight losing streak into his matchup with Moicano. The 33-year-old Brazilian is 16-5-1 overall. He is 8-5 in the UFC. He is 3-2 at lightweight. He lost his last time out. It was a short notice matchup with Rafael dos Anjos back at UFC 272 in March, where he lost a unanimous decision over 5 rounds. That snapped a 2-fight winning streak for him against Jai Herbert and Alexander Hernandez. Odds here actually favor Moicano just slightly. He is minus 125, Riddell plus 105 as the underdog. Keith, did we jump on the Riddell train too soon? Did we jump off the Moicano train too soon? Because honestly, I was a little surprised when I saw the odds to this fight. I was surprised that Riddell was the underdog, but there we are nonetheless. How do you see this one playing out?
I think the odds about set. Like, it should be pretty. I mean, it's pretty close to a pick 'em. I think that's how it should be. Moicano's a tricky fighter. I mean, he's really well rounded. He's your Muay Thai striker style. He stands directly in front of his throw, which is not a good thing, but that has that style. He's a serviceable boxer. I like him at 155 more. He seems like he developed some power. He always had a good kicking game. I think you go back to like the Calvin Kattar fight where this is a long time ago, but he just battered Calvin Kattar with calf kicks. He's an underrated wrestler. And when he gets the fight to the ground, he's an absolute savage. He's a BJJ black belt. Good back takes, good submission game. He's got 8 career submissions. His issue is his chin at this point. I mean, Jose Aldo, the Korean Zombie, Rafael Fiziev, they've all blasted him. Even the fight against RDA that he took on short notice, he took a lot of damage in that fight. That's the big concern about him. The skills, the technical skills are there. It's just wonder if his body's failing him. Now, Riddell, I don't think we got to jump on too much. I think he's faced 2 really, really good fighters and really, really good strikers and 2 tough stylistic matches for him. I think Riddell is a good, well-rounded fighter. I think he's a good athlete. If you go through his UFC career, the guy's been thrown to the wolves. He's a really good striker. He has a high guard defense, snapping jab. He attacks with combos. His straight right is beautiful. He slides in the pocket and he unloads big combinations. I've said this before. He's kind of your hold your ground striker where he's going to counter, but he's not going to back up. He's going to just stand there, try to beat you to the punch, which can work out really good if you're messing up his opponent's rhythm. It can go really bad if you don't beat him to the punch. I like that when he gets inside, he looks for elbows when he's in close. He's got some really good calf kicks. That's a good part of his game. But I'm a little worried about his chin. I mean, he's been cracked in back-to-back fights and hurt bad. Now, he isn't known for being a wrestler, but he can hit some pretty explosive takedowns, drive through the hips kind of guy. He will shoot without a setup, which isn't good, but he's really good at just creating a scramble and winning those scrambles. And that's because he has this he understands like the Granbrees and stuff. He keeps his hips moving and he's got like willingness not to like concede positions. And we saw that against like Alex Da Silva, a guy who's a good grappler. And he just made everything difficult for Da Silva, not conceding the takedowns. And he had the cardio and the wrestling cardio to kind of beat Da Silva. And he has the output and the pace to go an entire fight. Now, again, he's been cracked in the last two fights, so that's troublesome. But he's fought two really dangerous strikers, so I think this is a fantastic matchup. I think it's an extremely hard one to pick. I think that's why the odds show that. I think either guy can get a KO on the feet. I think Riddell could use his wrestling. I think Moicano could and should be favored in like the grappling if he gets, it wouldn't shock me if he catches a submission. So I think like everything that goes on in this fight, there's so many like. Check every box. Like if you put a poll up, you said on Sherdog, what's the outcome? Like, I might vote for all of them. Like, Riddell by knockout, Moicano by knockout, Moicano by submission. Like, I want to go the underdog here. I'm going to take Riddell. I think he's a little faster on the feet. I like his output. I think his wrestling could be enough to stop Moicano and kind of have it on the feet, kind of like an anti-wrestling game. I also like his cardio and his output, and Moicano's taken a lot of damage, and I don't trust his body anymore. So I'm gonna say Riddell gets back on the right track. I think he gets a third round TKO, and that'd be the second win for City Kickboxing if they go by my predictions.
I'm with you here. I'm feeling the upset. I mean, I kind of alluded to that when I said I was surprised that Riddell was the underdog, but it boils down to mostly what you said right there at the end. Like, both of these guys, there's reason for concern about their chin, but there's more reason for concern with Moicano. For a guy that's just 33, he's been through a lot in the UFC. He's been through a lot of wars. He's been knocked out a lot of times. He spent a lot of that time, in my opinion, unnecessarily cutting to 145 and sort of a victim of his own success. I mean, his first 5 fights in the UFC, he beat Zubair Tukhugov, Jeremy Stevens, Calvin Kattar, and Cub Swanson, and he lost by third-round submission to Brian Ortega in a fight he was probably winning. Like, I had him up 2 rounds. It's a hell of a run. I had him up 2 rounds to none on Ortega when he lost. And granted, that's what Ortega did to people until very recently, but that's a hell of a run. And because of that, since then, he's never had an easy fight. He's been in the same position as Frankie Edgar that we're going to talk about in a few minutes here, only without the hardware on a shelf to show for it, but just by becoming a contender so quickly and in such spectacular fashion, he minted himself a guy that has never really gotten a bounce back fight. And by the weight of his own balls has almost made things worse for himself. Like, who steps in on short notice to fight RDA?
Yeah. Bobby Green.
Yeah. Like,
Neil Magny. Balthroni.
If things go to the ground, I do see plenty of routes to victory for Moicano there. Fighters' stand-up game always ages worse than their ground game. Like guys that have long since slowed to a crawl on the feet can still be blindingly fast on the ground. But the clash of styles standing here where Moicano's a come-forward striker and he has great reach but doesn't necessarily want to fight all the way out, doesn't match up well against the guy in Riddell, who, as you mentioned, like stands his ground and throws back. I'm guessing that Riddell finds Moicano's chin here, and I'm guessing he actually finds it on the early side. Give me Riddell by first round knockout, and it's Again, it's not because I think Riddell is that much better a fighter than Moicano, because my second most likely outcome would be Moicano finding a first round finish of some kind, either like clubbing and subbing him or just, catching him with something really nasty on the feet. But I'm leaning Riddell here as the guy that just seems a little fresher. But this one should be a whole hell of a lot of fun for as long as it lasts. The main card of UFC 281 starts with a lightweight matchup between Dan Hooker and Claudio Puelles. Hooker, the 32-year-old New Zealander, is 21-12 overall. He is 11-8 in the UFC. As I alluded off the top, that 11-8 is split between featherweight and lightweight, and frankly, the lightweight record is much more impressive. 11-8 in the UFC, but that is 3-4 at featherweight and 8-4 at lightweight. He did lose his last two fights. He got tapped out in the first round by your now lightweight champ, Islam Makhachev, last October at UFC 267. Came back and got knocked out by Arnold Allen in the first round. That was at featherweight at UFC Fight Night Volkov versus Aspinall. That was, of course, UFC London in March. He's going to try to turn things back around, make it not be 3 in a row against the surging Puelles. The 26-year-old Peruvian is 12-2 overall. He is 5-1 in the UFC. Got knocked out in his UFC debut 5 years ago as a 21-year-old by Martin Bravo. Since then, he has rattled off 5 straight wins, punctuated by some lengthy layoffs. Most recently, he fought at UFC Fight Night Lemos versus Andrade in April, where he tapped out Clay Guida with a knee bar in the first round. So he'll be looking to make it 6 straight, certify himself, frankly, a title contender at lightweight, and he is not favored to do so. Hooker, minus 155 as the slight to moderate favorite. Puelles plus 135. Keith, despite two KO losses, two stoppage losses in his last 2 fights in both of his weight classes, Hooker is the favorite here over Puelles. I guess we just attribute that to him having fought an absolute murderer's row of competition in 2 weight classes since he's been in the UFC. I mean, it's like Moicano, only worse, frankly. Like when your last 5 fights, it's Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler, Nasrat Haqparast, Islam Makhachev, and Arnold Allen. I mean, Nasrat Haqparast is the reprieve there, and the other guys are all literally top 3 fighters.
Yeah, when Haqparast is your easiest opponent by far, that's a hell of a run.
Yeah, like you've got 3 champs, interim champs, or title challengers, and Arnold Allen, who's probably a top 5 featherweight right now and is probably going to fight for title next year. It is ridiculous.
Could be his next fight. It might be for the title, Arnold Allen. He could be the champion. Who knows?
Is it too much too soon for Puelles?
I don't know. So one thing that the most shocking thing to me is of this entire lineup, this is the card that opens up the pay-per-view. I think this is the fight. Like I'm really shocked by that, being that Hooker's on this, losing streak, and Puelles, like you mentioned, doesn't have that significant win. I was really surprised. I would have went with McCann versus Blanchfield, Reyes versus Spann makes more sense. Moicano versus Riddell, all these ones. I was just really shocked by that. As far as the matchup, it's a very intriguing matchup, so maybe that's why they're going with it. I'm worried about Hooker. He looked terrible in his recent run. In fairness, you mentioned he's going against Murderer's Row, but also he looked really slow, drained, going down to 145. It's a move that he really should never have taken. That said, back at 155, I hope we get the Dan Hooker that was, beating Paul Felder and giving Dustin Poirier everything in handle. Like, that's what I'm hoping we still have.
Splattering Gilbert Burns. That aged well.
There you go. Yeah, no shit. He's got good footwork. He did really good early pulling Paul Felder into his power. He did the same when Nasrat Haqparast. He likes to kind of circle, force you to kind of overreach, and then he comes back. The problem is you can kind of time that, and that's what Michael Chandler did. He does well to keep his distance. So if he wants to fight on that side, he has that like check left hook. He can hit while backing up, which is impressive. He does well to keep range with his check knees. He's got accurate, he's pretty accurate with his shots. He's got plus power. I mean, you look at the guy; the guy's huge. How that guy ever went down to 145 is insane. Really good kicks. Al Iaquinta was a fight that he calf kicked the hell out of Al Iaquinta to the point where Al Iaquinta switched stances. Though because of his long legs, he's a big target. You go back to like the Edson Barboza fight where Edson Barboza was kicking his legs is one of the most brutal things to watch. I don't know if I have this in my notes for a while, but I don't think it needs to be there anymore, but I want to say anyways, he's an underrated wrestler. We've seen him win wrestling battles. He's really good at getting in clinch and then just dropping down, using his long arms, dropping down on the hips. Or he's good at like slide by him, like getting close, kind of something we just saw the Neil Magny to get inside, like something slide by, duck under, chuck, one of these kind of moves. He will shoot on the hips, and he's got those long arms that it's hard to defend it. He took Dustin Poirier down 4 times. He'll also catch a kick, which like if you throw kicks at him, he's willing to. If you go to his body, he'll catch one. He's hard to take down himself because of those long legs. He also kind of, what we were talking about with Dominick Reyes, he'll kind of spread that big base and use those elbows. I mean, sure, Islam Makhachev took him down really easy, but most guys aren't going to be like Makhachev. But the biggest concern about Dan Hooker is he's taken an ungodly amount of damage. I mean, the Barboza fight we talked about, the Poirier fight, Paul Felder, the knockout of Michael Chandler, his last fight against, Arnold Allen was teeing off on him in his last fight. So his chin could have just suddenly fallen apart. And we might be seeing that right now. And that's the biggest concern. Now, Puelles, he's only 26 years old, which is really nice. He's just kind of entering his prime years. He's a southpaw, really good volume on the feet, but he's just kind of serviceable boxer. He also likes to kind of try to pull people into his power. So it's going to be interesting who's going to be the one pressing the action in this fight. He's got a good kicking game. He's got I like that he goes to the body, he goes down to the calves. He should have a huge target with the calves going against a guy like Dan Hooker. He's a decent wrestler. He's got some good entries. I like when he gets the fight to the ground, he advances position. But the biggest thing about his game is his subs. He can hit subs everywhere, off his backs. He has those long legs. He has 5 submission wins. He tends to be a knee bar specialist. He has 3 of them already. The one negative I like about him is that he goes for submissions and willing to give up position to get it, which is obviously troublesome. Now, this is a huge step up in competition for us, and then it's like the opposite Hooker. It's just a huge step down at this point. I'm torn, but I'm gonna go with Hooker. I think he hits harder. I think he can win those clinch battles. I think he's gonna get a takedown or 2. He's gonna have to watch his legs. He's gonna have to defend the submission attacks. I just don't think Puelles gets the fight to the ground, gets where he wants. I see Hooker being on top for a majority of the fight. Give me Hooker by decision, and that'd be 3-0 for City Kickboxing. See if I pick him to go undefeated.
I understand like what a step up in competition this is for Puelles, and what a reprieve it is for Hooker from the brutal slate he's faced recently. But it's just hard for me to get out of my mind how not good Hooker has looked in his last few fights. And it does make me wonder if all the damage and all the years of unnecessary weight cutting has just finally taken something out of him. That Barboza fight, I mean, it was Sherdog's beatdown of the year in 2018, and it was almost 4 years ago. Like, he's been in so many wars since then. The Iaquinta fight, the Felder fight, obviously the Poirier fight where he took a ton of punishment, even though it was a very close fight, and then a couple of like quick beatdowns. It makes me wonder if they are just intersecting at the perfect time. That he is starting to slide. He is already in some amount of decline at 32, whereas Puelles is probably coming into more of his natural power at age 26. He was this skinny 21-year-old kid when he debuted in the UFC, and since then. He's just kind of improved from fight to fight. I think this is a step up in competition at the right time for him. Give me Puelles by late submission. I'm going to say, he holds his own on the feet. He does land some. Hooker's certainly going to get his licks in, but they'll probably both go to work on each other's legs. But later in the fight, Puelles is able to get Hooker down. And does he get 4 knee bars in 6 wins in the UFC? I don't know, but he finds some kind of submission in the 3rd round. We head now to the men's bantamweight division for a fight where, if what we are being told is correct, we will hear the name of Frankie Edgar being called for the last time before he picks up his Hall of Fame jacket. It is Edgar versus Chris Gutierrez, and what the answer has announced will be his retirement fight. Edgar, the 41-year-old New Jersey native, 24-10-1 over a storied mixed martial arts career. He is 18-10-1 in the UFC. He is 1-2 since dropping to bantamweight for one more try at glory. Since dropping to bantamweight, he has a win over Pedro Munoz, and then back-to-back losses via knockout to Corey Sandhagen, who erased him with a single flying knee, and Marlon Vera, who knocked him out with a front kick to the face at UFC 268 last November. Edgar's last hurrah will come against Gutierrez, the 31-year-old Dallas-Fort Worth native, 18-4-2 overall. He is 6-1-1 in the UFC, and since losing his UFC debut back in 2018, is on a 7-fight unbeaten streak. Since having a draw against Cody Durden a little over 2 years ago, he's won 3 straight against Andre Ewell, Felipe Diaz-Colares, and Dana Bakary. The most recent of those, the Dana fight, was at UFC on ESPN, Blades versus Dawkins in March. Gutierrez, comfortable favorite here. He's minus 205. Edgar plus 175. Keith, we're talking about Frankie Edgar, one of the greatest fighters in MMA history, pound for pound. He's not the greatest lightweight of all time, though he's kind of up there. He's not the greatest featherweight of all time, even though he's surprisingly high on the list for a guy who never won a title there. But you take the entire body of work, who he's beaten and how, and who he lost to and how, and he's one of the 10 or 15 greatest fighters ever to do it.
Absolutely.
Maybe not the exact... Oh, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you. You mentioned, not the greatest lightweight ever, but he's up there. Not the greatest featherweight ever, but up there. I wonder if he was always in his right weight class, if we'd be calling him the greatest bantamweight ever.
That's a really good question.
I don't know.
When in 2011, when the WEC came across and Hanan Barao and Dominick Cruz came over as kind of the class of the division, that's right around when Frankie Edgar was beating BJ Penn.
Yeah, that's my point.
You wouldn't have wanted to see Frankie Edgar 20 pounds down against those guys, or hell, wouldn't you wanted to see him against Jose Aldo right when they came across in 2010?
Yeah.
Dropping down to 145. There's a lot of what might have beens for a guy that had no weight class when he came to the UFC. When he started in the UFC, his first fight in the UFC was, of course, the Tyson Griffin fight in February of 2007.
Yeah.
The UFC lightweight division had only been back in operation for a year and almost died again because, it disappeared after Penn and Uno had their draw. There were no fights in the division at all for 2 years. There was no belt for 4 years. They brought it back, and as soon as the belt got reinstated, Shirk and Franca both pissed hot after his first title defense, and I'm surprised the UFC didn't shelve the division again. Mm-hmm. It's incredible, what he did with what he had to work with. The best we got for you is a division where everybody is 15 pounds heavier than you.
Yeah. Knowing him, he was probably trying to figure out, we're talking about him going down to bantamweight and all that. He was probably trying to figure out a way he could have won the welterweight title.
Probably. Probably kind of eyeballing Matt Hughes. He's he ain't that tall. This guy that wrestled at 133 at Clarion.
Yeah. He wrestled, I wrestled. It was a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's an All-American. I'm an All-American.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, so talking about this fight, the retirement fight, not the specific name Chris Gutierrez, because, there are 50 bantamweights in the UFC. But is this the right kind of matchup? Is this a kind of matchup you would have given him for his farewell, or would you have been looking further up or down the rankings, or for an older or younger guy?
It's tough, because do you want to toss him an absolute softball? Or do you want to give him a guy that everyone knows this is a joke? You just give him Frankie Edgar a win. That's probably what I would have done, But this is the guy where it's a winnable fight, but it's also a very tough test. What I've tried to, if I'm going to use Frankie Edgar to get somebody over, maybe I go with someone that I think is a little bit more marketable than Gutierrez. But stylistically, I think it's a winnable fight for Frankie Edgar. I really do. Do you want me to continue?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So you mentioned the Tyson Griffin fight. That's the night I became a Frankie Edgar fan. Like, that fight was tremendous. The scrambles they had going on in that fight. It's one of my all-time favorite fights. And Frankie will always be, like, I don't know. He'll be one of my favorite fighters of the time. I don't know anybody who doesn't like Frankie Edgar. He's on the feet. He's a well-rounded fighter. He's a classic wrestler boxer. He's an elusive, like, kind of herky-jerky style on the feet. A lot of L-step in. But he keeps everything tight. Good volume. He darts in and out of range really well and unloads combos. Though we've seen decline in him because recently he struggled with the length of guys like Max Holloway, like Corey Sandhagen, and that was never the case. And that was because he's losing a step. He was able to get around those guys before. He's, think about, like, even like a guy like Benson Henderson, who's huge. The size advantage was there, but it wasn't the length that gave Frankie Edgar fits. Even though he's 41, I still think he's pretty fast. Like, speed's not the issue with him right now. I like his calf kicks. I mean, you go not that far ago, he beat Pedro Munoz with calf kicks being the big part of his game. He can still wrestle and he'll look for it. I mean, he's got a great double leg. He has a double to the single. He loves the knee tap, kind of like Dominick Cruz style. And he's relentless to get it. I've said this before. He's a guy that he will shoot 10 times just to get, because he knows he's gonna get it on the 11th time. Like, he'll miss 10 times, and it won't stop him from shooting that 11th time. He's got really good top game, busy ground and pound. I wouldn't call him a submission threat, but he has 4 career submissions, so he does enough to keep you honest. Going 15 minutes is nothing for him, even at this age. Well, I shouldn't say that. The cardio is an issue. The ability to take the damage is the question. Like, every minute that goes on is a better chance of him getting knocked out. But the cardio to go hard for 15 minutes is still there. But the question is his chin. I mean, he's been knocked out 3 of his last 4 fights. He's been knocked out in back-to-back fights. But despite all that, let's not forget it. Like, when I think of Frankie Edgar, I'm going to think of a guy that you mentioned completely undersized, but I'm going to think about a guy who has, like, the unbelievable fighting spirit, heart. I mean, it's absolutely legendary. Now you move over to Chris Gutierrez. Gutierrez, he's a good striker. He's very technically sound. He works behind a busy jab. He kind of just touches. He's more of a, like, an outside point fighter. He's not big, light you up with one big shot kind of guy. I like that he goes to the body. He uses feints well to kind of draw out attacks. He has incredible leg kicks. I mean, look at his fight against Vince Morales when he just finishes him with leg kicks. He does make the mistake of backing straight up, and he does struggle to stop takedowns. I mean, go back to the Cody Durden fight. Durden dominated him in the wrestling department early in that fight. So I do think this is the best possible matchup for Edgar, where it's not an absolute softball, that it is a test. He's going against a guy that's not known for his, like, one shot, put him away power. And I wonder what Gutierrez's game plan will be in this, because kicks are such a massive part of his game. But Edgar will drop down and catch a kick. Like, he can't go to the body. He's going to have to go to the legs, because Edgar will catch a kick, get a takedown. And it's in Madison Square Garden. It's his final fight. He's going to have one of the biggest buzzes. I mean, everybody loves Frankie Edgar. Then you put him in his hometown, close to his hometown, being that he's from New Jersey. I think Edgar finds a way. I think he gets some takedowns. I think he wins a very heavy grappling affair. Give me Edgar by decision in this swan song.
Oh, I hope you're right. And I have nothing against Chris Gutierrez. Like, from everything I've seen, he's a lovely dude. There's nothing to dislike about him as a fighter. But for someone that I've been watching for almost as long as I've been a fan of this sport, you do want them to go out. Like, you have so many memories.
The only people rooting for Chris Gutierrez is Gutierrez, his family, friends, and teammates, and then someone who bet on him.
Yeah.
But just like no one's sitting on their couch watching this fight going, then I really hope Chris Gutierrez wins. Like, unless you,
I really just want to see Frankie Edgar knocked out.
Yeah,
that little bastard. Like, who would ever say that about Edgar?
You're like the most, the most hardcore like Red Sox fan who wants to see the Yankee fan get knocked out. Maybe that was like.
I agree with you that Edgar still has a lot of what made him great. He is still, a pretty fast, nimble guy, even as he is advanced in age and dropped in weight. He still has endless cardio and pushes a pace to make that cardio a factor. I also agree with you that the question mark now is the chin, and we had to know that was coming. I mean, I'm not saying he's like Ninja Hua or like Kazushi Sakuraba or something, but he's the UFC's closest approximation to one of those Pride or K1 type guys that just took massive artillery from bigger guys for years and years and years. I mean, what really made his a legend are his 3 fights with Gray Maynard. Like, what got him the belt were his 2 fights with BJ Penn. What made his legend were his 3 fights with Gray Maynard, where he lost the first fight, drew the second, and won the third. And in the second and third fights, he took a 10-7 round both times, where it could have been stopped. Just a guy that Maynard might have been the biggest 155-pounder in the division at the time, just an absolute tank of a man that was a great wrestler, and Edgar couldn't take down early and just pummeled the shit out of his skull for like, what?
I'm looking at just talking about the greatness of Frank Edgar. His UFC debut was UFC 67. Do you know who headlined that card?
Not without looking and cheating.
Okay, I'll tell you, Anderson Silva headlined it, but that's not why. How many title defenses did Anderson Silva have at that point?
It would have been 0.
0. He was fighting Travis Lutter, his first title defense, and I know technically it ended up not being a title defense, but it was Ultimate Fighter 4. That was, wow. Yeah. Sorry, carry on.
But like at the time, like as heroic as that seemed, to just have this scrappy, indomitable little guy just literally doing a David versus Goliath thing and just using heart and cardio and technique to beat a much bigger fighter, we had to know it wasn't built for longevity, and yet he ended up with incredible longevity. It was shocking the first time he got knocked out cleanly. Like Corey Sandhagen was the first guy to actually knock him out, and that's 2 fights ago. Everyone else, even the Korean Zombie, the Ortega fights, they were an accumulation of damage where the ref is like,
oh, you mean out cold?
Yeah, I'm saying like got knocked out cold.
Yeah, Ortega like blasted him.
Yeah, Ortega definitely like there's no question. I'm not saying it was an early stoppage. I'm just saying that like he got up unassisted afterwards and walked out of the cage. Whereas with Sandhagen, like it was smelling salts and bring the stool in and nobody's going anywhere for 5 minutes. It's impressive that he lasted as long as he did. Like,
incredible.
After he lost his title, his lightweight title to Benson Henderson, he immediately dropped to featherweight, got an immediate title shot against Jose Aldo. He lost. He then rattled off wins over Charles Oliveira, BJ Penn, Cub Swanson, Uriah Faber, and Chad Mendez to get another shot at Aldo. Like kind of like I said, for a guy who never won the title, he's sneaky high on the list of greatest featherweights of all time.
Just think about that for a second. He beat Charles Oliveira. Like how weird does that sound? Not that Frankie Edgar beat. I mean, 135-pound Frankie Edgar beat 155 was just the champion.
The missed championship weight at 155.
Yeah,
like 6 months ago.
Yeah, insane.
Yeah, just unbelievable. And I want to believe in him here. Gutierrez is a guy that, frankly, Edgar would have chewed up and spit out 5 years ago. Gutierrez is a symbol of how much the sport has evolved over the 15 years that Edgar's been in the UFC, because even though he's a bantamweight, he's bigger than most of the featherweights that Edgar was fighting, and probably some of the lightweights. I mean, he's probably about the same height and weight as like lightweight title holding BJ Penn, honestly. I do agree he's less likely to just ice Edgar with a single strike unless he gets real happy on the spinning back fist again like he did in his last fight. But I think he's just going to have a little too much for Edgar everywhere. Like, Edgar will be there. He'll be game for all 3 rounds. But if he wants to fight to the ground, I think he's going to have a tougher time getting there than he's used to. If he hangs around on the feet, Gutierrez, again, probably won't just knock him out with one strike, but just, every little thing's going to hurt a little bit more. And I think Edgar might just start to look like a 41-year-old man for the first time, and maybe the perfect time, considering, again, he's proclaimed that he's on his way out. But give me Frankie Edgar to lose the decision here, and I'm not happy about picking it. Third from the top at UFC 281 is a lightweight matchup between Dustin Poirier and Michael Chandler. Poirier, the 33-year-old Louisiana native, is 28-7 with 1 no contest overall. He is 20-6 with 1 no contest since joining the UFC out of the acquisition of World Extreme Cage Fighting. Like several other fighters mentioned previously on this card, he has fought at featherweight as well as lightweight. So while he is 20-6 with 1 no contest overall in the UFC, he is 12-3 with 1 no contest at lightweight. One of those 3 losses at lightweight was in his last outing. That was his 3rd round submission by Charles Oliveira in the headliner of UFC 269 last December. Prior to that, he had won 3 in a row over Dan Hooker and his pair of rivalry-defining fights with Conor McGregor in 2021. He'll look to get back to winning ways and stay in the immediate title picture against Chandler. The 36-year-old Missouri native, former Mizzou Tiger, is 23-7 overall. He is 2-2 since joining the UFC finally as, at the time, probably Bellator MMA's greatest homegrown star. And while 2-2 doesn't sound all that great, he has fought about as tough a slate of competition as you can imagine, as he debuted against Dan Hooker, won via first-round knockout, had back-to-back fights with Charles Oliveira, where he failed to win the title, and then Justin Gaethje in a title eliminator, dropping a unanimous decision. He came back in May, and in the co-headliner of UFC 274, had a competitive first round against Tony Ferguson before putting him out with a front kick to the face just 17 seconds into round 2. So he'll be looking to make it 2 straight. He is not favored to do so. He is the plus 150 underdog, Poirier minus 175 as the favorite. This fight for me comes down to there are 2 variables between these guys, because there are quite a few similarities between them for me, but the 2 differences are kind of what this fight hinges on for me. Both of these guys are lights out strikers in terms of power. Just Poirier can kick. Chandler obviously can kick. He just knocked Tony Ferguson out with one of the greatest front kicks we've ever seen. But generally speaking, both of these guys prefer to do their damage with their hands. And both of them are extremely heavy-handed, knockout power in both. Chandler has the classic, overhand right fastball of the wrestle boxer. Poirier, has a little bit more of a diverse arsenal on the feet. But either of these guys can knock any fighter out on any given night on the feet. Poirier has never been more than a serviceable wrestler. Like his takedown defense is it's stout enough against people not named Khabib Nurmagomedov, but generally speaking, if he wants to keep a fight on the feet, he's been able to. Chandler is an outstanding wrestler, and the thing that I think this hinges on is, unlike most wrestle boxers that are crossing over into their late 30s and pushing 40, he is still willing to wrestle. Like most wrestlers at that point, they've lost a step. It's a lot harder work than standing in boxing, and they just kind of abandon it. Fedor abandoned it. Tons of ground fighters do. Chandler is still willing.
Dan Henderson, Josh Emmett.
Calling Dan Henderson a wrestler in an MMA context is almost misleading.
Josh Emmett doesn't wrestle anymore. Romero.
Exactly, and in Emmett's case, it's this very same reason. He's 38 and he's had some knee surgeries. Yoel is 55, and who knows what he's had done. Chandler, still blindingly fast. Chandler is athletic and explosive. It's the cliche that, Mike Goldberg used to hang on black fighters in 2006. Michael Chandler is athletic and explosive. Just blindingly fast double leg. As a former standout collegiate wrestler, he does everything well. And if he wants this fight on the ground, I have the feeling he's going to be able to get it there. So that's one thing this hinges on. The other thing this hinges on is that while Poirier has always been capable of being caught and finished on the feet by somebody with enough power and enough speed, like Conor McGregor, Michael Johnson, he's still the same Dustin Poirier in that regard. Yes, he can be caught, but I don't feel as though his chin is compromised. Chandler's chin at this point does concern me. Both these guys have been through some incredible, brutal wars on the feet, but Chandler is those few years older, and he's to the point where, he's starting to get really hurt by stuff on the feet that surprises me. So I think for as long as this stays on the feet, Poirier, as the younger, slightly fresher guy with greater reach and more weapons, it stands to his advantage. If they just bite down and throw down, I think Poirier catches Chandler with something that knocks him out first. If Chandler decides to at least keep Poirier on his toes with the threat of wrestling, or actually tries to bring this fight to the ground, in the first round before Poirier really gets a chance to settle in and establish the range, that really plays to Chandler's strengths. I don't know how likely that is. I compliment Chandler for being continually willing to lean on his wrestling at this point, but Chandler's also a dog. There's something in Chandler that just, he wants to, he and Justin Gaethje gave us exactly the fight I expected to, where neither of them really tried to bring it to the ground, even though they could, and they just slugged it out and gave us a great fight for 3 rounds. But I think if Chandler does that with Poirier, he's going to get knocked out. And that's kind of what I'm leaning towards. So give me Poirier by second round TKO here. But, if Chandler shoots a beautiful double and puts Poirier on his ass 90 seconds into the fight, I will know that even if I got the outcome right, my pick for this fight was wrong, because it's not going to look anything like I expected. You're on mute. Keith?
I keep hitting the button. I think it's going off.
You're mute again.
I don't know why he keeps doing that. They know I'm excited to talk about this fight. It's a fantastic fight, and it's going to be a blood and guts fight. That's what they want. That's what's going to happen. Should it be? I don't know, but Poirier is you mentioned, he's gonna have a huge size advantage on Michael Chandler. He's a massive lightweight. I've met him in person a couple times. He looks like a middleweight. He's huge. He's a southpaw that has good volume. He switches angles when he's mid attack, so he kind of really setting up his power shots, because he's always changing up his attacks, and he'll punch through your defenses and still get a knockout. He keeps his base underneath him, so he generates so much power. I mean, his counter right hook is one of the best strikes. He landed against Max Holloway. He landed against Conor McGregor. I love that he works the body with punches and kicks. I mean, you go back to the Eddie Alvarez fight, and again, this is going back a little bit, but he brutalized Eddie Alvarez with body shots. I like that he's added this great kicking game lately. Obviously, we saw that against Conor McGregor. He doesn't check leg kicks. I mean, Dan Hooker was having some success with the leg kicks against him, but he is such a power puncher. I mean, he hurts pretty much everybody he faces. I mean, Gaethje and even losses. Charles Oliveira, he drops, and he has a legendary chin, but you got to wonder about it moving forward. I mean, Oliveira did hurt him in their fight. Now he's not a great wrestler from distance, but he can get some takedowns in the clinch. I mean, he's a very smart fighter sometimes. Sometimes I should say, like he became a wrestler against Conor McGregor, which was really smart. But he's been taken down a lot. You're much higher on Dustin Poirier's wrestling than I am. I actually think for an elite fighter, I think he's a weak wrestler. Obviously, like the elite of the elites, the Khabib Nurmagomedov, whatever. Like I'm not concerned about them getting taken down by him. He takes down everybody. But Eddie Alvarez took him down. Dan Hooker took him down a bunch, and he makes it worse because instead of sprawling, he'll do that jump for the guillotine thing, which I hate. But his best attribute is his heart. When it gets tough, he doesn't mentally break. He does the opposite. Look at the late stoppages he got against Eddie Alvarez, against Justin Gaethje, and fights that both of them were bloodied up, back-to-back wars. I think about the Dan Hooker fight and the Max Holloway fight where he didn't get stoppages, but he needed to win that fifth round, and he went to a place against a guy like Max Holloway that's legendary for stuff like that. No, it was Poirier that was able to get that. Michael Chandler is a really well-rounded fighter. He's your classic wrestler boxer. I'm glad that you described him as like explosive. You described him of the stereotype of the black fighter because he really is the quick twitch, fast, explosive guy. He fights behind a hard guard. He's in and out, darting in and out of range, unloading big shots. He keeps everything inside tight. I like that he goes down to the body knowing that if he can work the body, it's going to set up his KO punches later on. He's got KO power in both of his hands because he's a really good example of someone who keeps his feet underneath him. Even when he's extending, he still generates so much power off his feet. Now, he's very hittable, though, and that's because he's not quick to rechamber his shots. I mean, you go back to the Pitbull fight when he got knocked out, and it was Pitbull just throwing a punch over the top. Countering his own shot. He doesn't check leg kicks to him, and it's been a while, but the Brett Primus stopped him with calf kicks, and that could be a really smart avenue for victory for Dustin Poirier. But you mentioned it. He's a really good wrestler. He's a D1 All-American, which is a hell of a feat, and to be wrestling this deep into his age is really impressive. He's got blazing fast entries. He explodes through the hips. He's freakishly strong. Like, he gets a limb. He'll lift you up, slam you. Smothering top control. We've seen him use, not so much in the UFC, but in Bellator, he used a very heavy game plan in some big fights against against Benson Henderson, against Brett Primus, against Yamaguchi. He turned to a really, really wrestling focus. Now, I can almost guarantee this fight's going to be a war. I can't guarantee how long it's going to last. Like, it can only last 60 seconds, but it probably would be a hell of a 60 seconds. Though I don't know if it has to be. And what I mean by that, I think your analysis of this was dead on. And this is going to sound crazy for me to say this, but to me, there is such an avenue for victory for Michael Chandler if he just turns this into a wrestling match. And being that this is only a 15-minute fight, to me, it's even more. Really, he's got to get 2 takedowns. He gets 2 takedowns. He could win this fight. He could win 2 rounds. I just doubt he does it. I think he wants to stand out. I think he just loves being in the UFC. He wants to be that action fighter. He has that thing like, with the Eddie Alvarez brawls he had and the Justin Gaethje brawls. And we oh yeah, that's another thing. We didn't talk about the amount of damage that Chandler had. The Justin Gaethje fight. Don't forget about those 2 unbelievable all-time wars against Eddie Alvarez, which I still think is one of the most underrated rivalries ever of Alvarez and Chandler. And for some reason, now that Eddie Alvarez is a free agent again and won champion, I think UFC should bring Eddie Alvarez back just to have the 3rd fight with Chandler, just to do it. Even though I don't know if that would work out well for Eddie right now. One
let Eddie go.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. They let him go.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
No, that's why the UFC can bring it back. I doubt that Chandler does that. I think Chandler stands with Poirier, and again, I'm with you. I'm worried about the chin. I'm worried about Poirier with the big shots, And then even the Ferguson fight, like we all remember that unbelievable front kick knockout. Tony Ferguson looked absolutely terrible against Nate Diaz. But before that knockout, he was looking great against Chandler. He was looking fast. He was landing. If Tony Ferguson lands like shots like that, against Chandler, subbing Dustin Poirier landing those shots, and Dustin Poirier's put you out cold. So I think Poirier hits really hard. I think he lands a big shot, and I don't think it's necessary. I really do think Chandler could win this if he wrestles. I just don't think he does. I think Poirier puts him out. Give me Poirier by second round TKO.
There you go. 2 picks for Dustin Poirier to get it done in the feature fight of UFC 281. That brings us to the co-main event of UFC 281, a strawweight title fight between two-time champ Carla Esparza and former champ, now challenger, Weili Zhang. Esparza, the 35-year-old Californian, is 19-6 overall. She is 10-4 in the UFC. She was the inaugural women's strawweight champ. She is once again the strawweight champ, having won her title back from the same woman she won it from in the first place, Rose Namajunas, this time at UFC 274 back in May, where she took a split decision in a frankly slow-paced and baffling fight, but for what it's worth, the right person won, and that marked a 6th straight win for Esparza. She will look to make it 7 straight, look to defy the doubters and defy the odds once again in taking on Zhang. The 33-year-old from China is 22-3 overall. She is 6-2 in the UFC. 6 wins sandwiched around a pair of back-to-back losses to Namajunas. She fought most recently in June at UFC 275, taking a second win over former champ Joanna Jędrzejczyk, this time by second-round knockout. She will look to become the yet another 2-time champ in the division. She is heavily favored to do so. Zhang, one of the biggest favorites on the card, minus 340 right now. Esparza plus 280 as the disrespected sitting champ. Keith, the round robin is it feels like it's almost complete. We've talked many times about how the same 5 women, Esparza, Zhang, Jędrzejczyk, Namajunas, and Jessica Andrade, have handed this title back and forth to one another for over 8 years now. There are challengers like Amanda Lemos and Marina Rodriguez just knocking on the door, waiting to be the next. This feels like one of the last matchups of those original 5 that we're going to see, especially if Jessica Andrade decides to stay at 125. It's probably over after this. Like, our next title challenger is probably not a former champ. Are you looking forward to that? Does it feel overdue? And tell me how you see this fight playing out.
Yeah, it's always good when you have new faces. Like, I think that's always good. So I always want to see the best people fight. So if it's a new face, if it's no face, but it's fun to have new excitement, not the same old matchups. I mean, even though Brandon Moreno and Davis and Figueiredo are the 2 best flyweights in the world, like, all right, like, how many times are we going to see these guys fight each other? So, yeah, I get that. This matchup, wow. I'm surprised that Carlos Esparza, we talked about this on the recap of the last event, that she's disrespected this much. But I don't get the line, but I understand why it's huge, because Carla Esparza has always been overlooked. It's because she doesn't have the most pleasing style. She has the most exciting style. Her striking is very limited. She throws a lot of single strikes. She throws a lot of power shots, though she lacks power. If we're being honest, and I think if she's being honest, she throws to set up her takedowns. She's a good wrestler, though at times she can shoot without a setup, which is like ironic to say that she throws to set up her takedowns. But she's got good entries. When she gets on the hip, she's really good at cutting the corner. She understands not staying right in front of her opponent's sprawl, like slowly working, inching. She chain wrestles shots together. She's very relentless. She has the mindset to get the fight to the ground. she understands that it's going to be difficult to get it down, and that doesn't seem to frustrate her. She continues to look for it. She also, if you pressure her and overextend trying to land shots, she's good at just dropping underneath your overextensions and getting a takedown. If she gets the position, she's really well on top. She controls. She understands to hold the position before looking for things. She'll advance slowly, inch by inch, to get a better position. She can be kind of accused of stalling on top at times. Not a huge submission threat, but she can lock on a submission. But she has good cardio. Like, she can wrestle hard for 15 minutes, 25 minutes. Like, that won't that's not how you're not going to. She's not going to tire herself out wrestling. She's more going to tire you out by you being on bottom. Now, Weili is really well-rounded. She's elusive on the feet, moves around really well. She's got good output. She attacks with combos. When she gets in the pocket, she unloads huge shots. She's one of the hardest hitters in the division. I mean, you look at how she starts Jessica Andrade. Obviously, that spinning knockout of Young Jacek is a KO of the Year candidate. But more impressive than getting that knockout is the one in their first fight where she just butchered Joanna Jędrzejczyk's face to the point where if you showed a picture of Joanna, she was unrecognizable. I like the way how she mixed kicks wells into her combinations. Again, she has a spinning back kick. She also has a spinning back fist now and spinning back elbows. So you got to watch for that. She does get hit a little bit more than I would like. She eats a lot of shots, but she also has like a I'll eat one to land one. She's got an underrated ground game. She's got a nice clinch, nice trip takedowns. She's good at winning scrambles. I mean, you look at the fight against Rose Namajunas, the second fight, where she landed 5 takedowns in that fight, which was really impressive. She's got a good top game. Going back a little while, but you go the Jessica Aguilar fight where she dominated on the ground. She was taken down by Tisha Torres, who's smaller size, kind of like very built similar to Carlos Esparza. So that can give Carlos Esparza some hope there. As far as the prediction goes, when I think about the division in Carlos Esparza, I think this is one of the toughest stylistic matchups for Esparza. I really think Weili dominates this fight. I think she stops the takedown attempts. I think she lands a bunch of really hard shots. When Esparza's stuck underneath her, she's a sprawled out on Esparza. If she wins a scramble and ends up, if Esparza shoots and like is forced to pull guard or something, I can see her landing a lot of big shots there. And if they get back to the feet, I see Weili kicking out the legs, destroying her with big shots. I think this fight might look a lot like Esparza versus Young Jacek fight. Obviously, I'm going back a long time ago, but how Esparza first lost the title in her first reign. So give me Weili. I'll take Weili by third round TKO.
Yeah, I'm with you on all these points of analysis, and I understand the irony in saying, man, Carla Esparza is constantly overlooked and underrated right before I pick her to lose badly. But I'm with you. A lot of it comes down to style. The things that Carla Esparza does well just don't match up with Weili's vulnerabilities. Like, Weili is always hittable, as you mentioned, but Esparza isn't the type that's going to plunk her with a single shot. She'd have to get through a lot while enduring the return fire coming the other way. And Zhang is already confident enough in her power and her chin that, as you mentioned, she's willing to take one to give one. And if you take one to give one, you end up looking at the end of the night like Joanna Jędrzejczyk, like unrecognizable to your loved ones. Esparza's grindy takedown game. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if she were able to take down Zhang a couple of times, but Zhang is so she's so eager to get back to her. Like, she is not inert when her butt hits the ground, and she's so physically strong and so explosive that where Esparza is normally good at winning the wrestling in a way that does not exhaust her gas tank, I think it'll be a lot of desperate work for her to try to hold down Zhang for any amount of time. So even if she, same as, I say, even if she gets through some strikes on the feet, it's not, a very plausible avenue to victory. Even if she's able to get a couple takedowns on Zhang, I don't think that guarantees her winning rounds or even guarantees her not being back on the feet 30 seconds later and once again running into all of Zhang's artillery. It's just a bad matchup for Esparza. Like, Esparza does match up well against some of the top women in the division. You have to, considering that she's on a 6-fight winning streak, but Zhang ain't it. Give me Weili Zhang by third round TKO, and I think Esparza will probably be pretty beat up and discouraged by then. With that, we come to the headline fight of UFC 281, a middleweight title fight between Israel Adesanya and Alex Pereira. Adesanya, the 33-year-old Nigerian by way of New Zealand, is 23-1 overall. He is 12-1 in the UFC. He is 12-0 in the UFC at middleweight. His only loss, of course, having come in his unsuccessful bid for 2-division glory against Jan Blachowicz last year. Since the Blachowicz loss, he has won 3 more in a row over Marvin Vettori in a rematch, Robert Whittaker in another rematch, and Jared Cannonier. The most recent of those, the Cannonier fight, took place in July at UFC 276. But the fact that 2 of those 3 fights were rematches perhaps helps bring us to where we are now, where he is taking on the relatively MMA inexperienced Pereira, who nonetheless has some history with him in the kickboxing ring. Pereira, 35-year-old Brazilian, is 6-1 overall. He is 3-0 in the UFC. He is on a 6-fight win streak overall since losing his MMA debut all the way back in 2015. Really, he's on a 4-fight win streak since coming back from another lengthy run in kickboxing in 2020. In the UFC, he's beaten Andreas Michailidis, Bruno Silva, and most recently Sean Strickland, which was at the same UFC 276 where Adesanya's last title defense took place. That was obviously a very intentional booking on the part of the UFC so that they could start promoting this fight if both men ended up winning, or could start promoting Strickland versus Adesanya if Strickland won. As it turns out, Strickland ended up being not the test for Pereira that some might have hoped, as he obliged Pereira with a striking battle and got run right over in half a round. Those eye-opening performances might be what has contributed to the relatively close line here. Adesanya, one of the most dominant champs in the sport, only minus 165 here. Pereira plus 140 as the underdog. Keith, in the Sherdog editorial Slack, where, you know, we talk about things on fight night and just have general team conversations, you issued the challenge to all staffers yesterday, I believe it was, to watch both of Adesanya's kickboxing bouts with Pereira. He's like, watch the actual fights.
And I'll save that. I know where you're going with this, but I'm
gonna hand it to you. Just watch both the fights and watch of the second fight, the one where, of course, Pereira knocked out Adesanya. Don't just watch the 10-second clip of the finish. Watch the whole fight. I did so. I had already watched the whole second fight. It was the first time I'd watched the whole first fight. I only knew that it had been a competitive decision. What did you learn from those fights, and how do you see this one going?
Well, I'll save what I learned about those fights for the ending of my little rant, just because it'll give away my pick.
Okay.
I'm super excited for this main event. Super, super, super excited. Not like Makhachev versus Oliveira excited. That was another level, but it's definitely one of the best main events. Such an amazing backstory. I'm looking forward to talking to both fighters this week at the UFC media days and press conferences and all that. I've always said Adesanya is one of the most marketable guys because everybody I know either loves him or hates him. For a guy who's never really done anything controversial outside of the cage, he has a lot of haters. And I get it. He can be one of the most exciting when he's on his game, when he's flowing, he can be one of the most exciting fighters. But when he plays it safe and does this boring, like, I get why he's had some boring affairs. His last fight against Carneiro being one of them. Adesanya is really good. I think he is the best striker in UFC history. And if he wins this fight, we really do have to start bringing in the question, like, how far away is he from passing Anderson Silva? Especially if he beats a guy like Pereira, who a lot of people think is a bad stylistic matchup. This is the first time we've had someone matched against Adesanya where they are legit threat on the feet to him since I mean, I guess a lot of people thought maybe Robert Whittaker was at that time, but it just didn't seem that. I really, by the way, side note, that second Robert Whittaker fight was not as close as people make it sound like. That was a clear win for Israel Adesanya. Anyways, but Adesanya, he's long and lengthy. He's so relaxed and confident on the feet. I've asked this in the past, and I'm going to ask him if I get a chance. Does he think he's better orthodox or southpaw? Because I don't know when I watch him because he's so good in both stances. He tends to fight like Anderson Silva, John Jones, and Petroyan and guys like that, where he's a bit of a slow starter, but that's because he's thinking, he's setting up traps, he's seeing, he's like your Tom Brady, a Peyton Manning type quarterback, where they have the physical tools, but it's the master of the game plan, the reading the defenses, something that they saw in the first quarter that they're going to make him pay on the 2-minute drive at the end of the game. He's a master of distance. He understands his range really well. He feints with his hands, with his feet. He'll feint just to see how they're going to react, and he's going to use something later. I've seen him at times just kind of freeze guys with his feints. He's got quick hands. He throws combos with his punches and kicks so well. He's probably the most accurate striker in UFC history. I've described him in the past as he's a sniper because he has great vision. He understands the striking game so well that he's so good at anticipating what his opponent's going to do next. Check how easily he landed on guys like Derek Brunson, the first fight against Robert Whittaker, Paulo Costa. I've said it before. He was playing chess while they were playing checkers. He was 4 or 5 moves ahead of them. Good head movement. Even when you land clean on him, you really don't, because he really rolls with the punches. So it's kind of deflecting. He's got great dexterity in his hips. He throws kicks up so easily. I'm so impressed how easily he just snaps a question mark kick when it seems like no effort. He hits so hard. He's strong in the Muay Thai clinch. I like his Muay Thai clinch. I like that he throws these foot sweeps. And he's much harder to take down than people talk about. He has in the past been held down against bigger guys, Marvin Vettori or Jan Blachowicz. They were able to hold him down because of how big they are. And he struggled with the size of Blachowicz. Pereira is built like Blachowicz. He's a big, massive dude, and he's bigger than he was when they kickboxed. Like, he's massive. He's put on muscle. He's matured. So he's much bigger. That actually might be very surprised people. That actually might be an area where Pereira has success, just getting in close, grinding on him, wearing him down, clinching with him, maybe even getting a takedown himself, being that he's training with a guy like Glover Teixeira. Now, Alex Pereira obviously is an elite striker himself. I mean, you don't have 2 wins over Israel Adesanya without being an elite striker. He's long and lengthy. Like I said, he's built like a heavyweight. Like I think like Alex Pereira can like go pick up a smart car, like just pick it up. Like he's a huge dude. He's both explosive and fast while being technical. That's how I described him last time. He's a perfect combination of speed, accuracy, power. He marches down his foe, and like we saw, like against Sean Strickland, just marched him down, waiting for his chance, and then when he has a chance, he doesn't miss. He's so accurate, no tells. Like, he lands that deadly left hook. That's his legendary strike. That's the one that he landed on Israel Adesanya, what he put him out with. But he throws it so short. It's sharp and short. It's not overextended. There's no tells, and that's why. I mean, he did it just on a dime, just landed it. That's how he put. Like we've seen guys with much bigger. Like I think about like Mark Hunt with this big whooping thing, or Junior Dos Santos, something like that, landing this big hook. No, his is just short, sharp, and that's why he's able to put guys out. He's got thudding leg kicks. He does keep his chin a little high and drops his hands, which is a little surprising. And he definitely doesn't like being like pressed on. Like, if you press the action to him. He's got a good plum clinch. He's got beautiful like knees and strikes. He's so strong, and he's been hard to take down because he's so big. And when he's taken down, he works back up. He gets a whizzer, he gets an underhook, he gets something like that, and he works himself way up. So that's been really impressive. Obviously, he's taken a big step up going against a guy like Idrisana. Not in the wrestling, but obviously in the striking. Though he's passed with flying colors. So when a fight gets announced, I kind of instantly make a prediction. But I always remind myself to change based on what I see. So I was on the fence of this fight, but I listened to what Israel Adesanya said. And when he was asked, last time he was asked by the media about Alex Pereira, he said, how many guys here watched the fights? And it was like one person in the room. And he got all pissed off. I don't even remember this. He got all pissed off and he said, do your fucking job. Do your job. Well, Israel Adesanya tells me to do my job. I'm going to do my job. And I'm going to watch the fights. And I watched them. We'll talk about the first fight. Israel Adesanya was absolutely robbed in the first fight. Was robbed. You said the fights were competitive kickboxing. No, it wasn't. I scored all 3 rounds for Israel Adesanya in the first one. The only round that was somewhat competitive was the second round. Izzy was teeing off on Alex Pereira. I can't believe all 3 judges gave the fight. Tell me I'm not, maybe, and I'm not a kickboxing guy. I don't score a lot of kickboxing matches. So maybe there's something I'm not understanding. I'll admit that. Like, I'm extremely casual. I'm an MMA fan. I couldn't believe how dominant it was for Israel Adesanya in their first kickboxing match. So then I go, okay, well, maybe the second one's going to look much different. Obviously, I know how it ends. So I watched the second one. Okay. He got called with it was a perfectly timed left hook. It was perfect. Put him out. Great stoppage. He was unconscious. Okay. Before that, it was more dominant for Adesanya than it was the first fight. He won the first round. He dropped him in the second round. He had a standing 8 count when he was going in. That if it was an MMA fight, the fight would have been stopped. He wasn't really defending. He was landing 8-9 punch combinations where the referee stepped in and gave a standing 8 count. So that's a 10-8 round right there. And then he's winning the third round. And honestly, his entire offense for that one fight was the left hook that he landed, which obviously, you put on the smaller gloves, it becomes even more dangerous. It's something even more concerning. Izzy has taken more damage since then. But I want to remind you, everyone keeps saying, oh, wow, he knocked him out with those, the 10-inch, the 10-ounce gloves, that were 12 ounce, I'm not sure exactly what, probably 10, somewhere between 8 and 12-ounce gloves. What will he do with the 4-ounce gloves or the 5-ounce gloves? He was hurt too by Izzy. It goes both ways. I keep hearing everyone saying, like, oh, my God, what is Pereira going to do with the 4-ounce gloves? What about Izzy? Izzy has 4-ounce gloves now, too. So I did my job, Izzy. I hope he actually sees this. I did my job. I watched their fights. I was on the fence before. I am not on the fence before. I feel confident in Izzy. I think Izzy hurts him. I think he's too fast for him. I was impressed in their fights how he was blasting with knees to the body, kicks to the body. I'm a little concerned that we might have a low, affair. Obviously the octagon is bigger than kickboxing, ring. So there's more movement, obviously more on the line in this fight than there were in those fights, much bigger stage. We've seen really both of them have low output at times. So I'm a little worried about that. But I think Izzy's going to make a statement. I think he goes in for the kill. I think he batters Pereira with the body. I think batters on the knees. I think he swarms and punches. I'm taking Izzy Adesanya by 3rd round TKO.
I love that that's your take on their kickboxing bouts, because I agree, like, after watching them. And, like, just to clarify, when I say all I knew was that the first one had been competitive, that's the only narrative I had, was that he had won a competitive decision, like, quote.
I don't think it was.
While watching it, I feel as though, like, I didn't, like, score round by round, but I certainly felt as though he got very much the better of that one. And I thought he had been winning the second one, like, literally right up until the finish. No, I'm with you here. Different sport, different time. I mean, which is a good point. Which obviously is a good point, because it goes both ways. But yeah, but it's a different sport in a way that's not likely to affect this fight too much. Like, I can't imagine either guy intentionally bringing this fight to the ground except as an act of desperation if they're like, badly hurt. So it's going to turn into a kickboxing match in an 8-sided cage in lighter gloves. But I still think Israel Adesanya is the better kickboxer. And any changes since then probably favor Adesanya. He has a lot more reps in a cage, both in live fights with top fighters and obviously in years and years of training. Pereira has that same power. If anything, he has more power than he did 6 or 7 years ago. Just he's put on bulk. He's wearing smaller gloves. But I'm with you. I think this is going to be an outclassing moment. And just the only question in my mind will be whether it's like the Cannonier fight turned out, where it was a very hesitant, gun-shy, but very clear win, or it's like I expected the Cannonier fight to be, which is like the Costa fight, where Costa just came forward and went out on his shield. But like, I'm not sure which of those we get, but I'm leaning in your direction as well, because I think you're right that Adesanya is bristling a little bit that people are giving Pereira such a chance. I think Adesanya is going to be aggressive compared to some of his other title defenses and make sure to make a statement here. Give me Adesanya by 4th round TKO, and he will have been winning every round and arguably every moment of the fight up until then. That is it. The Sherdog Radio Network preview for UFC 281, Adesanya versus Pereira. I've been your host, Ben Duffy. He has been Keith Shillan. If this is your first time watching one of our previews, first of all, thank you. We hope you've enjoyed it. This one has been pretty strictly business, just because we had a lot of fights to talk about and we got to this a little later in the week than usual. There's often a lot more goofing off and side conversations and historical asides, but we do try to provide a good blend of entertainment and actual in-depth analysis. Please do like, subscribe, give us a comment. Keith and I are both very good about responding to those comments. We'd love to hear your takes on these fights, your predictions. If you think we're off our rocker, if there's one of these fights that you think is a lock, make yourself known. And if you're right, we'll shout you out on the recap, because the recap is the other big part of this. Please join us. Yeah, usually about 10 or 15 minutes after the main event, we are live on the Sherdog YouTube page, where we will talk about all 14 of these fights. If, knock on glass, all 14 make it to the cage, we'll go in reverse order from the main event on down to the first prelim. We will talk about what was good, what was bad, what was surprising, what was controversial. There's always something, even when there are no Glory MMA fighters on the card. And most importantly, the live chat is wide open on our YouTube page throughout. So we're taking your questions and your comments in real time. We love interacting with you there. It is both of our favorite part of our week to just kind of enjoy as like dessert and an after dinner drink after a great night of fights, which is what we hope this is. Between now and then, thank you once again for watching. Enjoy the rest of your week, and by all means, enjoy the fights.